Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is the Apostate Prophet. I hope you're having a fantastic day or evening or night or whatever it is that you have. We are a little bit late. That's because today he had a problem. He was held up by an act of God, and there was the issue here. But here we are, no problems at all. I was just zoning out, and I was just waiting for the intro to finish. I totally forgot that we're having a live stream right now. I was totally blank. So anyway, yeah, I'm here with Jay tonight. I would like, if you want to introduce yourself to everybody, who are you? What do you believe in? Why are we here tonight? We can just go ahead with that, I guess.
Yeah, so I cover a lot of different things on my website. I do a lot of essays and videos that cover everything from movie symbolism, film symbolism. I have 2 books on that. I did a TV show based on that book. I do a lot of philosophy, a lot of debates with everybody from atheists to Muslims to Roman Catholics. And then I also have a Discord server where we do a lot of the same stuff in there. So that's pretty much most of my time is just doing that kind of stuff. I also cover a lot of geopolitics. I host the 4th hour of the ALEXJONES show.
Uh-huh. Oh, we have to censor that here. Or...
Well, I don't want to get your channel in trouble, but
okay, yeah. Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, so that's what I do.
Okay, fantastic. You are an Orthodox Christian, is that right?
Correct. Yeah, I've been Orthodox I've been convinced of Orthodoxy for many years, but I was received about 2 years ago.
Okay, wonderful. So we're mainly here tonight because, as far as people know me, I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist. I don't talk about it very much. My whole activism is mostly built on doing different things, like criticizing Islam, which is my former religion, which I know a lot about. Since I have a very diverse audience, people who are, of all kinds of different beliefs, and many Christians, I am often asked about my belief in God, and it is something that I have for quite a long time, like for a very long time actually. I've thought about it for forever. I have just never really publicly talked about it, and people have been recommending you as somebody to talk to in this regard about why I don't believe in God, why you believe in God, and just to have a friendly discussion about this. So that is the intention here. The intention is not to have a debate and to get and crush and destroy each other, but rather to have a serious, genuine exchange on why we should or should not believe in God. So that's where I would like to go with this. Now, since it's such a free talk, such a free conversation, I haven't really planned ahead on how to start this. But I guess it would be interesting to find out what makes you believe, or what has changed your mind in those last 2 years, for example.
Well, I was raised Baptist. I didn't really take it seriously. My family was kind of halfway serious about it. By the time I was about 18, I got a little more serious, started reading the Bible back then. And then I kind of got into church history, the history of the church, theology, how the Bible came to be, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of my 20s was wrapped up in those questions. I looked at a lot of atheist arguments, apologetics, philosophy. So then my undergraduate degree was in philosophy, and then I went on to do graduate studies in analytical, continental type stuff, and mainly got into orthodoxy around age 30. So that was about 10 years ago, and started reading a lot of the Eastern Church Fathers. Read other religions too, looked at perennialism, looked at Platonism, Neoplatonism, and all that kind of stuff, different schools of thought. And a lot of different motivations and reasons, I guess I could give for why I still believe in God or believe the Orthodox view. The 2 that come to mind would be on a personal level. I believe that God has been active in my life and has helped me in many ways and has answered prayers and those kinds of things. Those definitely wouldn't be the arguments that I would bring to a debate because they're not very convincing. But to an individual, those kinds of things can be assuring and convincing. On the objective philosophical level, I would look at things like what's called the transcendental argument. So that's typically the type of theistic argumentation and school of philosophy that I ascribe to, and I usually tie it into what's called divine conceptualism, which is a form of theistic argumentation and analysis that looks at abstract objects and entities and shows how they have to be grounded in a certain way, in a certain divine mind. And then on another sort of, if you wanted a kind of a tacking onto that, I also look at argumentation from like messianic prophecies and these kinds of things, which have actually been pretty strong in arguing against Muslims. I know that's not what we're here to talk about tonight, but I do think that they are good sort of attestations to the truthfulness of Christianity. If Christianity is true, we would expect to see things like prophetic things that do objectively come true that we can go verify. So basically the transcendental argument and then, the reliability of prophetic predictions, I think, are the strongest claims for Christianity.
I see. I've always thought you mentioned something about your personal reasons earlier, and how those are not strong arguments to bring in a discussion or a debate. It's funny. I've always thought over the years, when I see discussions about when I see debates that are centered around scientific arguments for or against God, I kind of see that as a giant waste of time. I feel like
I agree.
I feel like there is no point in arguing all the scientific dimensions of the matter at all. It doesn't prove anything. You don't get anywhere with it. Whereas I feel like discussing personal experience is, to a person, probably the strongest argument to believe in God. Whereas in a public debate, it is probably the weakest argument for God.
Totally.
Yeah.
Another thing too is that the kind of the school of philosophy that I would come from believes in and looks at things according to paradigms or presuppositions. So I think that we all have a governing network of beliefs by which and through which we interpret the world. So if we come to the data, like scientific data, it's impossible to divest ourselves of presuppositions and assumptions. We're all going to have rose-colored glasses. And so that being the case, I think it's a much more sound argument, a stronger argument to look at these types of issues in the realm of the domain of philosophy, which is kind of in a way prior to empirical scientific investigation, because science is undergirded by philosophy, whether the scientist knows that or not.
No, I have this issue. When I look at arguments for or against God, I have this. There's this one problem where I would raise a logical inconsistency of the whole concept of God. That is actually one of the main issues that I usually think about when it comes to the question of God. It is kind of similar to the problem of evil, which many people think is a strong argument against God. I usually don't think that a traditional problem of evil is necessarily on its own a very strong argument against the existence of God, but rather if you extend it further into for example, how it makes sense that God created evil, created humans as beings that are able to be evil, created evil, created a place where they would eventually go to be punished, when he could have simply just created a place where evil doesn't exist, because evidently it is possible, because that is the eventual eternal abode as far as Christianity tells it. And God's omnipotence and the fact that he is all-knowing also requires that beforehand, before God created everything, before God created us, before he created good and evil, before evil came forth, however you want to see it. I guess with Christianity you would say that I don't know how that is with orthodox Christianity, but I usually get the objection very much from Protestants, for example, that God did not create evil, but that evil emerged from the rebellion or acts of Satan, for example. But nonetheless, evil was created. Evil was part of this whole plan, and God must have known at the very beginning how we would have, what kinds of choices we would make, how we would design our free will, what we would do with our free will. He would know that eventually we would end up in evil and eternal torture, but nevertheless he created us. That in summary, we could go into that very very deeply if you wish, is I think one of the major reasons why I have always had an issue with the belief in God, the monotheistic or the Islamic or Christian God in and of itself. So I don't even get to the point of arguing prophecies, for example, or arguing Christian scripture or Islamic scripture, because my whole problem is that I am just stuck at logically making sense of God and free will and evil. And if that doesn't make sense, if there is one big major logical flaw, and if that gap cannot be filled, if that cannot be explained, then how could I simply ignore that and move ahead and look at prophecies, for example? That's
right. Well, there's quite a few issues that you brought up there. Several of those would require.
I was just.
It's okay. I mean, there's areas where I would add quite a bit of nuance, but for one, I would say that the operating assumption here is that we have a notion of good and evil, some sort of value judgment standard by which we're going to say that God, in this case, is irrational or inconsistent or immoral. We're going to then subject God to that standard that we kind of already assume is fair or unfair. And the difference with the argument that I would make is that at a paradigm level, we don't really have the ability to, from the outset, decide what we think is fair or unfair, because if you read like the book of Job, for example, where this issue comes up, God's response to this very question is, well, if you're finite, then by necessity, you're not going to be able to understand, for example, all of the different infinite interrelations between, beings who are making free will decisions. So you're not able to know what the big scope picture is because you lack omniscience, for example. The other thing I would say is that God isn't under any obligation to reveal to us why he does that. So we may not like that, but within the Christian paradigm, it's not inconsistent that God does not tell us in every instance why he allows XYZ to happen. The other thing I would say is that this is not really a problem that any worldview can adequately resolve. So this is kind of a problem that everybody's stuck in. It doesn't really matter if you could choose a different paradigm, but you're not really going to get a different answer to this question, because this question deals with things at a kind of meta omniscience level. And since all of us are finite, we don't really have access to that. Nobody's really going to have just by virtue of finitude, human finitude, going to have an exhaustive kind of answer to this question. So at the outset, I would say that objection kind of asks for the impossible for any worldview, because even most of the time, I don't think there's any objector who themselves could answer that question, right? Because let's say you don't have the theistic paradigm, you have a naturalistic paradigm, you still have these kind of unresolved meta level questions within that paradigm. So I just think that's a feature of all worldviews. What is the ultimate answer between why there's good, why there's evil, free will, et cetera? We'll never have that answer in this life. I don't think that it works as a significant criticism of Christianity, because it assumes a kind of moral benchmark standard by which to judge God, which I would need to know from the atheist or the skeptic on what basis they have that moral benchmark or objective standard to make that judgment call. And then lastly, I would say that there's also a distinction between evil as a privation in our view and what we are calling evil. So, for example, we don't say that evil is a thing. It's not a substance that doesn't have ontological reality. It's a privation. So for us, evil is really only located in the move of the will away from the good. There's a good essay by one of the church fathers, St. Athanasius. It's called Against the Heathen. And he takes up this point. He takes up this argument, and he talks about how we don't really conceive of evil as a substantial creation, that God like gave it being or substance. Even when it comes to Satan himself, we don't believe that Satan has in his own nature anything evil. It's rather that his will is perpetually turned towards going against God, you could say. So even his will, even his nature, the fallen angels are not inherently evil. So nothing is inherently evil. And that would lead to kind of a Manichaean dualistic position if we were to affirm that. So I would argue rather that really only the paradigm where we're made in the image of God and we have the ability as individual sort of sentient beings with reason, with the faculty of willing, do we have a basis to even talk about good and evil. I would say that is my reverse argument, that we at least have within our paradigm the means and the modes by which we can judge good and evil actions, virtue and vice, how we can have, social standards and whatnot for society, a civic law, penal sanctions, etc. And rather on the atheist paradigm, there's not really a coherent basis as to how we can have those objective standards. Really, all you can appeal to, as far as I understand, from the atheists that I've dealt with and argued with for many years, is just kind of a social construct view, right? Well, we all agree to this, and this is kind of what makes things nice or better, or this is quote beneficial. But that's all kind of begging the question. I mean, how do we know what's quote beneficial? I mean, for example, is it beneficial to kill off everybody under 120 IQ? Or not? I mean, I'm not trying to say that you believe that. I'm just saying that there's a lot of difficult questions that you could raise that just saying something like a slogan like, "Well, we just do what,"
Jake,
give you a good answer.
So you just froze.
I was just saying that usually that utilitarian answer doesn't, in my view, go very far when you have kind of like difficult questions like, do we reduce the population or, this kind of stuff?
Well, I have quite a few things to say about that. I want to start at the whole question of existentialism, of existential angst. And when you, I would just like to go back to you are born. Or you come into this world as a human. You don't know anything at all. You have tribes around you. You have people around you who are all after the same thing. They seemingly all want to survive. They want comfort. They want warmth. They want food. They want happiness. Happiness they find if they experience life by giving each other comfort, by having comfort, by helping each other out. If they cannot help each other out because they don't have the means, they end up oftentimes taking from each other, getting mad at each other, and killing each other. These are, merely simply, things that are called good and bad based on their functionality. I like to think, when I think of morality, I like to think about the Mongols. The Mongols were a very problematic group of people in around the time of 1,000 years ago, at the beginning of the previous millennium, and when the Mongols were going around, the Mongols didn't have any morals to hold on to. All they had was that they were tribes that were distributed among the East Asian, Northeast Asian steppes, where land was terrible. It was scarce. There was nothing to do. There was nothing to plant. They didn't really have much the option to live together and to survive together and to flourish, which is why all they knew was to fight each other and to take from each other, which is what they did for most of the time. They fought each other, they killed each other, they became extremely tribalistic, aggressively tribalistic, built superiority onto each other. Then certain individuals came and provided unity among these Mongols. And what they did was to open up into the rest of the world and to attack those lands where people don't live as desperately as the Mongols live in the steppes. And what they did on that path, in order to simply live better, was to invade all kinds of lands, invade all the lands that they encountered. And they didn't care at all about any morals. They didn't care about being good and bad. They spread fear, and they conquered by slaughtering young and old, male and female, sexually violating people, placing them onto on gates to just make people afraid and to just say, hey, we are here, we will take your land no matter what, now get out. And that is how they lived. That was their morality for a while. Then these people settled into the regions that they conquered, and they started living as proper societies, as civilized societies, and started adapting into their environments and started developing more functional kinds of moralities. And then the moralities that they developed and that they adopted were merely based on, as said, on how things function, on what people want, on what works. There was not a divine logic behind it. What was behind it was, hey, if I live here now, and if I like to eat when I'm hungry, and to have some warmth when it's cold, or to cool myself off when it's too hot. If I like to raise my children, if I like to be given things, then I should make sure that we don't kill each other. That we outlaw killing, so that you don't just come and kill me, and you don't just come and take my belongings. We should make rules. We should establish these rules, and people establish these rules merely based on functionality. Merely based on the fact that people simply want to desire this, that this is logical, this is how society functions, this is how it works. If you don't make these rules, people slaughter each other, people kill each other, people take from each other, and there is no happiness beyond this. So morality in that sense is quite logical, rather than requiring any deeper meaning. But when it then comes to judging God, and God's intentions, God's plans for us in creating us and eventually condemning us to eternal hellfire, I would rather judge God not based on this, which is hard to do, but rather based on the morality of Christianity itself, the morality which Christianity teaches us. For example, when the Christian God teaches us that we should forgive each other, that when Jesus says, forgive them, Father, for they do not know, and we learn to forgive people for their gravest mistakes, but then you see that God condemns sensitive beings to eternal hellfire. This doesn't look cruel to me, it simply looks illogical and inconsistent to me. We can go much further into that, but the basis of that was just the gist of that was just that. Yeah.
So a couple things that come to mind here is so when you talk about the analogy that you made to the Mongols, and then how they didn't have morals, that they were sort of pragmatic, they did these actions that basically served the tribe or the leaders of the tribe, and then they kind of settled into the lands that they'd conquered, and then they kind of got civilized, and they erect laws on the basis of what works, and that this is therefore pragmatic. And you seem to say that what was pragmatic was therefore logical. I assume you mean to them, that they saw that as logical.
Yeah.
Right.
What works, basically. Yeah.
Right. But there's a problem in philosophy with equating what is, quote, logical merely with what works, because it's sort of self-referential. So there's nothing about something that works, and because it happens, that allows you to identify that with an ethical norm that's objective. And Hume, for example, illustrated this when he talked about how you can't get an ought from an is. So the fact that something is the case really can never tell you that it ought to be the case, and therefore give you some sort of ethical, binding, logical norm that you need to submit to. And likewise, I can make that same argument for logic itself. The mere fact that people do something and that something, quote, works, does not equate to that being identical to or a justification for it being logical itself. So this is two different domains. Like, I might be able to rip people off for a long time with faulty, say, math figurings that I'm doing with my algorithms or something like this, or I'm doing some checkbook manipulation, or I'm keeping two different books or something like this, and maybe I'm ripping off a business, and it works. But because it works, that doesn't mean that corresponds therefore to correct mathematical principles or abstract logic, you see. Mm-hmm. So that's the point that Hume is making for ethics is the same for your analogy, and it's the same for the comparison to logic itself. So I don't think you can make the move to equate, quote, what works with logic itself. That's a higher order question. So abstract objects, abstract entities can never be identified with physical states or physical phenomena. It's impossible. It's very easy to show that that's not the case. And so therefore, that's my immediate response to this. And on your question of God, in terms of his paradigm for giving, I would say yes. If God exists, then we have to judge God and his standard by the holistic revelation that he's given. And so, for example, forgiveness is not unconditional. Even for humans, it's not unconditional. Jesus says that you forgive your brother if he repents, if he asks for forgiveness. It's not incumbent upon me to, like, for example, just be a doormat and I have to let you rape my wife because Jesus said turn the other cheek, and I have to forgive you. No, that's not at all. I mean, there's a holistic context to revelation that includes the principle, for example, of self-defense, as well as Jesus' principles that relate to what to do in situations where you may not have the ability to defend yourself. I mean, if the government sends a whole team of people to take me, into custody or something like that, I guess it's not going to be beneficial, or it's pointless for me to resist, right? So I'm not going to grab my machine gun and try to be like Arnold Schwarzenegger and fend them all off. In that situation, right, based on the totality of revelation, I would do the principle of what Solomon talks about, that there's a time for war, there's a time for peace, there's a time to fight, there's a time to become a martyr. In that situation, there's no point in fighting. So it would be wiser to try to, just give in and give up. But in other situations, we do have the just principles behind when we should wage war, when we should engage in self-defense. And also, likewise, even God himself does not make forgiveness completely conditional. Unconditional. There are principles relating to repentance and changing your ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is true. What you said earlier, just because something seems to work well, that doesn't mean this is what we should abide by. You cannot just simply make something a normative rule. You cannot just form normative morality based on what seemingly works in one society or in one environment or one time. That is true, but it is more and more becoming a reality, which is what the laws of our time, which we form in our time, for example, are largely based on. They're based on what people figure out should happen, what people figure out should be the case, what people figure out, should be, what we should do, what we should allow and disallow, are largely based on what people actually desire, what they desire for themselves or what they desire for others. But in fact, I didn't earlier make the connection between how I can judge God based on a moral understanding as an atheist. But there are several issues that I want to go into here, which is I want to keep the thought of murder in mind. I would love to go with you into the discussion on why murder is wrong and why Christianity forbids murder, for example. And there, if we talk about murder, we can see that murder is simply wrong because it is simply dysfunctional. It is simply idiotic of people to murder each other. It is simply doesn't make sense. It doesn't serve the greater purpose of humans to murder each other. When a Christian tries to explain why a society in which God doesn't exist would be wrong because people would just murder each other because they would have no reason to abstain from murder, then they would also have to explain why murdering each other is wrong to begin with. And the only possible explanations that they could give to that would be that murder is dysfunctional. Murder is bad for a society. It is debilitating. It causes humans to be unhappy, to be unproductive, to seemingly not serve their ultimate meaning, their ultimate desires in life. Now, with Christianity, Christianity also teaches us that killing each other is wrong. It gives us these basic morals. I'm currently jumping totally away from that. Just we can go into that separately. But if we want to judge God and his act of not forgiving us for disbelieving, I think we don't really need a basis on which we can judge whether God is wrong in not forgiving us for disbelieving. I think we can simply judge God in very simple ways. I mean, just look at you and me. I assume you were born in America, right? I was born in Germany into a Turkish Muslim family. It was very likely for me to be born as a Muslim, to live my life as a Muslim. Maybe I had interactions with Christianity. I could have maybe at some point converted to Christianity, but it was extremely unlikely. Statistically seen, it was very likely for me to just keep existing as a Muslim and to eventually die as a Muslim. I was one of very few, and I eventually changed my religion. I became an atheist. For you, it is statistically very likely to be born as a Christian, to live as a Christian, and to die as a Christian. Maybe more likely than for me to become an atheist at some point, and extremely unlikely to become a non-Muslim at some point. Now, God puts us into this world according to the Christian narrative and the Muslim narrative. God puts us into this world, sends us a book, sorry, that was kind of Islamic language there. Reveals or inspires certain books that are supposed to serve as guidance for us to find the ultimate meaning in life. But we are put into geographical limits in which we are bound to most likely never find that actual purpose. You are much more likely to die as a Christian, while I am much more likely to die as a Muslim. Now, I seek for the true meaning in life, and I really want to become a Christian at some point. In fact, over the years, I really wanted to be a Christian because I really thought, hey, it would make my life easy. I would feel better about it. And I really looked for it, but I couldn't find it. After genuine seeking, it just didn't happen. I wasn't convinced. I was really not convinced by it. I tried my best. Now, this God that Christianity preaches will judge me for my disbelief, and will it eventually condemn me to hell, as it seems, as it is taught, simply because I was unconvinced and I didn't believe in him. Whereas somebody else who was born into Christianity and who has probably never ever questioned his or her beliefs will die as a Christian and will eventually go to heaven after all. Whether that person was a good Christian or a bad Christian, eventually that person goes to heaven and is granted heaven by God. If you look at this, there is simply an inconsistency which doesn't even require us to have a moral basis to judge this whole matter. It is simply internally inconsistent of God to create this system and then judge us based on that.
Well, there's a couple points that come to mind here. That, first of all, Orthodox theology is a little different than most branches of Western Christianity that you would encounter. So the tendency in the West, after the prevalence of Augustinian theology, and then in the Protestant domain after the widespread acceptance of Augustinian theology by Luther and Calvin, you get this kind of very dim attitude when it comes to, for example, all of the people who were born before the coming of Christ. So really only Orthodoxy has maintained what we call the doctrine of the harrowing of Hades. We actually believe that when Christ descended into Hades, when he died on the cross, he went down into the realm of the dead to preach the gospel. St. Cyril of Alexandria and other great Orthodox theologians make it very clear that that's because God didn't want to leave anyone out of the possibility of hearing this message. And so even pagans in the Old Testament who had died, St. Cyril says, were able to hear this message. So we don't make these sort of sweeping judgments that, well, sorry, too bad for you. You were born in China and you never heard about. We don't typically make that assessment because we don't have the Augustinian obsession that the West has. And I say that as somebody who was very into Augustine for many years. I have a large portion of his works up here. I spent most of my 20s reading him, and which is not to say that we don't have him as an important theologian in our church, but we don't give him the precedent that the West tended to give him, and we think that that's kind of an excess that wouldn't really make sense given the doctrine of God's mercy and love, which is what you're kind of hitting on. And I would also add, this is my opinion, but I mean, we don't typically judge. Paul says we don't make judgments about those who are outside of the church. It's not really our domain to do that. We can say that we know that it's our duty to try to bring them to Christ and bring them to the church. But let's say somebody grew up in, I don't know, a rural small town, and their only experience with Christianity was like a crazy snake handling church in the middle of nowhere. and they died. Now, would we say that we know that that person is damned because they didn't believe in some ridiculous snake handling cult? I would not say so. I think that's kind of absurd. I don't know what happens in that case, but I do know that what we're told, for example, in the book of John, Jesus says that to whom much is given, much is required. And he's speaking of the principle of revelation. So if you've been given a lot of revelation, a lot more is going to be required of you. Paul says in Romans 2 that even those who do not have the oracles of God, meaning the scriptures, he says they do have revelation in the sense of what we call natural law or moral law, or natural revelation would be maybe a better term. So we don't have that kind of sweeping negative assessment. We don't claim to know. We kind of leave that up to God. But we know that God is fair. We know that God is just. We don't think that there's just this kind of like hopeless pattern of billions of people that were created just to be damned. I think that's kind of ridiculous.
But still, the concept. I'm hearing myself. Okay, it's fine. It's better. Sorry, I was just totally thrown off by that. But still, you have the concept of. You have, based on biblical teachings, based on the New Testament, which tells us that those who don't have faith, those who don't believe, will not be saved, or will be condemned. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there are several references in the New Testament on the fact that those who do not believe will be punished for their disbelief. Those who don't believe will go to hell. Will go to a place of suffering or separation.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. Right, to whom much is given, much is required. So the more that you have been exposed to what is true and what is correct, the more accountable, the more culpable you are. So I'm not saying that automatically makes everyone saved. I'm just saying that we're not told, and if we're not told, then in our perspective is to, leave that up to God's judgment. So some of those questions we just don't simply know. Like what happens to infants that die outside of baptism? St. Gregory of Nyssa, a famous Orthodox saint, wrote a big essay on that. He basically just says we commend them to God. We don't know what exactly is God's plan in those cases, but we don't make the kind of sweeping assessment that, like we just literally think God's creating, billions of people to be damned. Mm-hmm. One thing that's different with Orthodox Christianity as opposed to Western forms of Christianity is that you get a scholastic attempt to try to give a definitive answer to every single question. And we're happy in many cases with saying that there's questions that we're not told. Mm-hmm. We just don't have the answer to all those issues. And there's also another doctrine that is not in the West that we have. It's called the doctrine of the toll houses, which is the notion of there is a journey of the soul after death. There's a famous book by Father Seraphim Rose, who's a pretty prominent modern Orthodox writer. And he wrote a book about that. And he actually compares it in ways. I don't want to overstress the similarity, but he compares it to kind of the journey of the soul in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. He says there's similarities between the two approaches. That doesn't mean that we're Tibetan Buddhists. I'm just saying that there is some truth in comparative religion. So other religions have this notion as well that there are experiences, there's phenomena that occur even after death where a person can come to have forgiveness in certain ways. That doesn't mean that I think that anyone is saved outside of Christ. No one can be saved outside of Christ, but in what ways God, can reveal things to those even after death, we're not told that either.
Well, the thing is, I get your point. It is not for you to exactly declare or explain the details of who is forgiven and who is not, and there's a lot of vagueness on that. You're not in a position to tell by your beliefs, but in the end, that doesn't really do much to the point. It only changes the magnitude of the problem, but the point still stands. The problem still exists. And, we still have the same problem, even if people are judged based on their abilities or based on their geographical regions, based on their standards, whatever you want to say. In the end, people are still judged flawed people created by God in flawed ways are still judged, and the book still promises for them reward or punishment. We are flawed beings. We make simple mistakes. In psychology, we learn that humans can barely be held responsible for so many mistakes that we make throughout the day, because so many of our mistakes depend on very simple, very small moments in our lives, on our environments, on our desires. And yet we are still at some point judged by not being convinced that God is real, that God exists. And God eventually condemns us forever for that. I know, I get it. You're saying we don't know the details of that. God may apply different standards to different people. There may be a different form of forgiveness, a different way that God tests some people, forgives other people, rewards other people. But in the end, the judgment still exists. It is still there, and nothing makes it disappear. It is right there in the scripture. It is promised. And it kind of seems illogical and unfair that God would actually send such a vague message to humanity, put them through a test over thousands of years, and each one of us maybe on average 70 years, and then seriously make such a brutal decision about our eternity.
Okay, I see your objection now. First thing I would say is that we would not say that it's vague. So there is a kind of inner testimony that is evident to everyone. That doesn't mean that I think everyone believes affirmatively the proposition that God exists, but we believe that in the inner domain of man's heart, in his innermost being, he does know deep down that there is one true God, and that God is revealed even in nature. This is the argumentation of St. Paul in Romans 1, and that's why we would say that there is such a thing as a universal moral law or natural revelation, so to speak, which is distinct from the Bible or Scripture, but it's the same content, namely that it's telling us that there is a personal God. But I would agree with you that we can't just look at nature and know that in the sense of like getting the right interpretation of God. We still need to look in the higher domain of more abstract concepts, perhaps, this kind of stuff, to get us to understanding what type of God we're talking about. But the mere fact that, like all, ancient civilizations, they had these inner sort of principles by which they would worship deities. I'm not saying this makes it true. I'm saying if I wanted to use the kind of pragmatic approach like you were talking about earlier, I mean, haven't all societies had some kind of sensus divinitatis, or sense of the deity that suggests that man's heart yearns for more? Again, I'm not saying that means that it's true, but I'm just saying that if we wanted to just survey societies, the mere fact that societies have that impetus, I think, suggests that there is a testament to God even in the natural world. I mean, this is why so many ancient societies worshiped nature. They worshipped personifications of nature, powers in nature, animism, polytheism, henotheism, etc. All these different theisms, pantheism, they suggest, I think, that there is something to that testimony even in the natural world. But I don't think that that's sufficient. And so we need divine revelation. And this is where we get into the text of Scripture and the different books and whatnot. And that arena, I would say, is not vague. So I would take issue with the claim that it's vague. I don't think divine revelation is vague. I think it's there might be areas of divine revelation that are difficult, but vague is not the same thing as difficult. So I don't think that anybody is without excuse. In fact, Paul says that all men are without excuse.
Well, the issue is that I have with this is, thanks for the explanation, by the way. The issue that I have with this is this is a very common argument to claim that we have it in us, that we feel it, that it is somewhere in there, the belief that, or the knowledge that God exists, that it is real. This is indeed something that I have heard quite often as a Muslim, because the Quran itself, for example, mentions the same thing, that it was placed into our hearts and that we know that it is true, that we know that God exists, that He created us, and that He made an agreement with us. The same concept exists in Christianity as well. I don't know how far it exists, but this is just an assertion. It's just a theory that is merely based on something that humans try to understand.
Okay, but remember, I wasn't arguing that it's true because of that. I was just saying that if we were to survey, ancient civilizations, I could give the way that you were looking at the Mongols and this kind of narrative of them, conquering and settling and civilizing. I could look at societies and say, oh, they all worshipped, different types of deities, so there's some inner sense of deity. But again, I'm not making that argument per se, because I don't think that necessarily proves the position. It is an interesting fact and an interesting approach to, in comparative religion, to look at all the different cultures that operate that way. But I certainly totally agree with you that it's not an argument that proves or disproves the fact that, well, therefore we have an inner sense of God. No, I would argue that on the basis of what is the revealed theology. So you're correct. The scriptures do say that man has in his innermost being this deep inner sense, which Orthodox theology calls the nous, N-O-U-S, which is a faculty we think that God gave us for knowing God directly. And we would say the reason that we don't, perhaps in a day-to-day situation, know God directly through the nous is precisely because of the fall of man. So we have to, within this paradigm or within Christianity, again, take into account the whole revelation. So the whole body of or deposit of revealed theology also has the doctrine of the fall. And so since man has fallen, and this is not really in Islamic theology, I'm not an expert on Islam. I've only been studying it for a year, but as far as I'm aware, it's not, it's obviously a lot different in Christianity.
Yeah, being fallen and original sin is not part of
right. And even Orthodox theology, their conception of original sin, again, is not exactly the same as the Augustinian Western position. But what we do, for example, Augustine doesn't believe in the nous, but we do think that man's innermost being is damaged. He's sick. And so part of the reason that he doesn't see God properly in the world or even in the scriptures is precisely because of that fallen aspect to humanity. That's a deficiency in our being, a corruption within our very being. And so what we do, what we think is the process of getting all that fixed, is theosis, deification, the process of going through that restoration and that healing process that brings us back to knowledge of God.
Mm-hmm. The problem is, I know you're not going to, you're not arguing that this is a major point for, or major argument for God or for religion.
No, I just wanted to point out that it's different than what you hear in like Roman Catholic or Protestant Christianity.
I got it. Yeah. The issue is that we have so many things in human history that are based on how humans are trying to understand the world around them, which don't exactly tell us much truth about the reality of our universe or the reality of where we came from and all that. If you look at history, it is quite interesting, actually, how much we take it for granted nowadays that we know we live in a big universe or in a vast universe, or we know that we are in a galaxy, and we know there are other galaxies. We know we are in a solar system, there are other planetary systems. These are things that we didn't even know till very recent times. It was entirely unknown until just a century ago, actually, that we live in a vast universe. It was unknown till a few centuries ago that there are other galaxies, that there are planetary systems which we cannot, which are outside of our system, that the sun is not the center of everything, that the earth is not the center of everything, if we want to go chronologically back. So humans have for quite a long time, up until the last few thousand years and until the last century, had very false fundamental beliefs about the nature of our world and of life in this universe. So we can actually see that much of what we see in human history, when we look at ideas and beliefs, is based on complete misconceptions, is based on people simply trying to understand this nature that they are born into. even if you look into the history of God, for example, the history of the history of monotheism, as far as we can document it, doesn't go back further than 3,000 years. The oldest documents that we have that exist go back about 3,000 years, I believe. It's like 1,000 BC is the oldest existing remaining. I'm saying remaining document on the one God of the Israelites. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but as far as I know, we don't have any documents that precede that. We do, however, have documents about other deities and other beliefs that go maybe almost 1,000 to 2,000 years beyond that into the past among Middle Eastern cultures. We see, if we look at old artifacts, old buildings, the first religious buildings, we see that people have had religious beliefs that greatly differ from monotheism and focus more on pantheism or polytheism or henotheism or many other things from thousands of years ago, from much longer before monotheism came into existence, as far as we can historically document it. That's what I'm not saying that's how it is. I'm saying as far as we can historically document it. If we look at history, we see that, for example, the belief that life is that the world, that the universe is this recurring cycle, that everything is going into a cycle, is going in a cycle, destruction and new creation, destruction, new creation, destruction, new creation. That belief, for example, is much older and much more universal than the belief of monotheism, which only became universal within the last 2,000 years. Before that, it was only a tiny religion among the Hebrew Israelites. So if we want to look at the history of things, that is actually one more reason why I think, why should we believe in the one God? Add to that the age of the earth, the age of the universe. Add to that dinosaurs. Add to that life that goes far beyond human existence. Why would we come up with the explanation that it is God? It simply seems like something that humans came up because they didn't know better. Sorry, it was a long talk.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a whole host of topics there. First thing I would say is
you should just stop me if it gets too long.
No, it's fine. I'm just thinking. So, like, you threw out a whole bunch of different kind of issues that like skeptics and atheists will bring up, which is fine. I don't mind that. But before we kind of go into all the different ones that you brought up there, there's a kind of a running thing that I've noticed in our discussion, which I would like to call attention to, that I think undergirds the questions of, looking at these ancient texts, dating these ancient texts. What about this scientific problem? What about this point with, Copernicanism or whatever? You've consistently appealed to things like, for example, when we were talking about the Mongols, you said, all of the people in this situation wanted survival. All of us want this. And you'll say these sort of claims about, science has shown this, we know that. And there's a lot of these appeals to what I would say are pretty strong epistemic principles, right? So you would be making kind of universal claims. Maybe you would qualify that and say, well, I was just speaking offhand. I didn't really mean that we have like this sort of absolute certitude, but
it's generalizations mostly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So exactly, to make generalizations, we need certain categories. We need certain things to be the case. And what a lot of people don't realize is that what has to be the case is a lot of philosophical and metaphysical baggage. And this is where we get into abstract concepts, abstract entities, and objects. And so for me, that's a much better way to approach these kinds of questions and issues rather than competing scientific claims about dating this text or that text. Because, I do have a significant section of the library that deals with, for example, dating biblical texts, looking at ancient texts. And it's not wrong to go into that. I could give you different books that discuss it from our perspective. But the difficulty is that you'll just kind of get into this back and forth of, well, scholar X claims this, scholar Y claims this. And so we're going to be throwing papers back and forth and scientific references. But one thing that we can't throw back and forth is the questions of objective epistemological principles, objective metaphysical principles, etc. That's why as a philosopher, I think I approach those things from that vantage point. I don't see how you could have generalizations without appealing to universal concepts, which I think have to be something more than just in the human mind. So I would just simply ask you, look, if you're going to do science, right, there's a lot of philosophers who have shown, for example, that science depends on math. Frege has some good essays on this. Husserl has some good essays on this, Logical Investigations, where he talks about how logic is actually undergirding the scientific method. Mm-hmm. So if a person is going to be an empirical scientist, right, they want to do empirical data research, et cetera, I want them to tell me how they make sense of the things that are immaterial, non-empirical, that undergird the scientific process. Now, when they can explain that to me, maybe then I'll listen to them when they tell me about their claims of dating this or that ancient text, of whether monotheism was, the first religion or not. And by the way, on that point, Christianity, we would actually say that monotheism is the original religion, if you mean the sense of God in the beginning in Genesis. That is the true religion. We think it's Jesus there in the garden. It's the Trinity. It's the triune God. And then we see the rest of the religions kind of being a kind of a schism of that true religion, even in the ancient, Old Testament Israelite period. We think we are in continuity with the Old Testament Israelite church, so to speak. The church is really for us just the New Testament, or the fulfillment of Israel, so to speak. This is actually a point I bring up against Muslims quite a bit, because I don't think Islam has any consistency when it comes to trying to make sense of the Old Testament law and the prophets. They're totally out of continuity. And one of the strongest arguments for Christianity, I think, is the continuity, but that's a different issue. But back to abstract objects, I would just say that, do you think that your paradigm or your worldview could give an account for abstract objects? I would turn the question around.
Well, I first want to say, when I talk about the scientific details, I said at the beginning that I don't believe we can prove or disprove God based on scientific discussions, based on how science does or does not agree with the existence of a God. So my point there was not to really make a science argument against God. It was merely to address the change in history of how humans have perceived the world around us, and how they have explained things, how their explanations have changed over time, how people have begun to understand the universe in quite different ways compared to.
But isn't that kind of a perspective or a point that really could be interpreted within either one of our paradigms? An atheist could explain that as just like the world coming to better scientific understanding. Even conceivably a Christian could make that same point, that we understand a lot more about the natural world than we did 2,000 years ago. So I don't really see how that kind of like.
No, I would even say that in the development of human history, religion is a more advanced state than organized religion. In terms of Christianity, for example, is a more advanced state in human development than many pagan civilizations, or quite civilizations that relied on personal favorite gods or stuff like that, for example. So I would definitely not make an argument and say, hey, times change and it's all better than religion. That's not what I'm trying to get at.
Okay, so to boil down my question earlier, when you say like an organized Christian religion-based civilization is better, what is the standard by which you're coming to that better there?
Good question. I would argue for pragmatism and, again, what works. When I think about several months ago, I believe, I was sitting here and watching a video in which Muslim missionaries talk about how they go to a distant, untouched tribe and try to invite those people, try to invite that untouched tribe to Islam in order to bring this untouched tribe into the folds of Islam. It's kind of a weird approach. Why would you focus on that? Is what I thought at the moment. And I thought my first reaction was, man, leave those people alone. They don't need your religion. Leave them alone. They are living their lives in peace. Leave them alone. That's what I thought at the moment. But later I thought, okay, maybe there is actually something good about this. If I think about when people ask me, what is one thing that you like about Islam? I usually say there is nothing that I like about Islam at all. Everything is horrible about it. Everything leads to something terrible, leads to something horrible. But there's one thing that I like about it, which is that it has organized societies. It could have, other ideologies, other religions could have come, like Christianity, and could have organized societies in a much better way. Islam organized them and turned them into vile societies. Sorry for saying that; it might sound offensive to other people in our time, but Islam did nevertheless organize very primitive societies and turned them into societies that function, that have certain institutions, that have certain aspects that are divided into different functions, where there is a government, where there are financials, where people educate themselves, where they engage in military actions for the survival of themselves, and so on. When I look at the history of humanity, I think one thing that we all want is to go forward and to be happier, to feel better, to have more power in our lives. We don't want to live forever. We want to live better. That's what we eventually want. We don't want to live forever. We want to live better forever. That is what I see. This is how I view it. I'm not saying this is a fact. In that regard, I would think that if a religion comes and sets clear universal rules for people and says, hey, you shall not kill, you shall not do this, you shall not do that, you should do this and do that, read this, educate yourself, do that, that is better for all of us than if people are just left to themselves, running around naked in forests and not doing anything productive at all. And wow. I'm basing this mainly on human productivity and pragmatism. We want to be better. In order to be better, we need to organize, and religion has done that in history.
Well, what about Rousseau? I mean, if you read Rousseau, he will give the exact opposite interpretation. He will say, is it not obvious, my fellow atheist friends, that civilization is ruined by religion, that religion and civilization kind of go together to hold on to. I'm not saying this is true. I'm saying that he will give on a pragmatic basis the exact opposite interpretation and say, look, civilization turns us into soy boys. It turns us into weak, pleasure seeking, just kind of hedonists laying around. Why don't we get back to nature, go be savages, out in the middle of tribes in the middle of nowhere? Maybe that's the better pragmatic solution. So that's one counterexample I would give, is that you could probably just turn that around, because pragmatism isn't really self-evident. It's not exactly clear what works for who, right? So let's say I want to be God Emperor, right? So I've been reading a lot of Dune. I really like Frank Herbert's Dune novel. And it's really touched me deep down. I want to be God Emperor of the universe. And so for me, what works is to crush everyone as best I can anyway. And that's pragmatic. So pragmatism for who? And on what basis can we judge which pragmatism we do and don't accept? Now, you might say, well, I'm going to be a utilitarian. I'm going to appeal to what's best for most people. And my reply is going to be, well, how do you know that utilitarian happiness for the biggest quantity of people is somehow better than utilitarian happiness for an individual in terms of quality? There's no clear way to adjudicate between the quantity of pleasure as opposed to the quality of pleasure. Maybe I get like a zillion pleasure points when I crush, crush your enemies. What is, the phrase from Conan when he's like, what is life? Well, it's to see your enemies crushed before you, to hear the lamentation of their women, right? Like maybe that's the ultimate, utilitarian quality principle as opposed to quantity. And I think in terms of the utilitarian kind of explanation that I hear you giving, most of the time people just assume that it means, well, for the most people. Why? On what? There's nothing a priori that tells me that I should please the most people. Maybe I should just be like an individual God emperor.
Well, the issue is nobody probably has an obligation to agree with what I think is best for society. And maybe inherently no one has the obligation to abide by what I think is best for humanity. But to assert that, do you want to?
No, you go ahead. I just have a point there. That's a good turn of argument there. I see where you're going.
So when you say maybe it is good for me, maybe it is good in my opinion to crush and to kill and to spill blood and to be rich and to make myself rich and do this and that. Yes, you could say that, and that is your point of view. That's fine. I have no objection to that. I will not say no. You are not allowed to have this opinion. You're not allowed to have this desire. No, I think you're totally entitled to that. But does it make sense? It doesn't. It is illogical to argue that would be in the best interest. It would maybe be in the best interest of you, and I would agree. It would maybe be in the best interest of me to go out and to take everyone's belongings, to be the master of everything, to crush everyone who wants to take my stuff away. That would maybe be in the best interest of me. But would it really be in the best interest of me? Because it will not work. And we have understood, people have understood that it doesn't work. Imagine.
Well, but wait a minute. You gave the example of the Mongols.
Of course, but that didn't work here. It only worked for that time. It doesn't eventually work. The Nazis, for example, I would go ahead and say the Nazis thought it was the right thing to do to act as they acted, and they really thought that they were onto something good.
So something working really just equates with success?
No, common interest. I will come to that. Common interest, greater benefit. You could say that 50 people can come together and can for 50 years rule with tyranny and be happy with that. But eventually that will fall because it doesn't make sense. For example, the idea of liberalism is based on the idea that that if we give power to religious institutions and make them and put them in charge and allow them to repress parts of the society, then society will repeatedly find itself in this continuity of revolutions, because one group will decide, hey, this is in our best interest, so we should oppress the other, and the other group will eventually emerge and try to overthrow that, and society will go through these revolutions over and over again, which is why it doesn't make sense. We cannot give power to a certain religion, we cannot give power to a certain institution. It simply doesn't work.
So what I hear you doing is turning the pragmatism argument into something that's subjective. So you seem to be saying that
no. Subjective to an extent.
Pragmatism is an objective principle.
You cannot say that. It's impossible to argue that pragmatism is an entirely objective. Is entirely objective. That's impossible.
But you said that I could have the opinion, or I could have the view that I want to be God Emperor.
Yeah, sure. But the thing is, but
these are counterexamples to show that to explain or justify pragmatism as what works doesn't work.
No. So, as said, I could go ahead and say, hey, it is in our best interest to rule this way. But think of it this way. There are two people that exist in an empty world. If one person exists by himself and there is no other human around him, there is no society, no one in the world at all, and this person can just do whatever he wants, then he can go ahead and do whatever he wants. No one cares. There is nothing right or wrong with anything that he does, because he's not hurting anybody, he's not harming anybody, he's not infringing on anyone's rights. There is secularly seen nothing wrong with anything that he does at all. If now a second person joins him in this world, and the second person also decides, hey, I want to do whatever I want to take everything that I see, then the interests of these two people will eventually start conflicting and interfering with each other. And they will have to, at some point, make an agreement. They will have to say, okay, come on, let's make an agreement with you. We both live here in this world. I don't take your stuff. You don't take my stuff without my permission.
Yeah, but I can feign this agreement in order to crush him down the road.
Of course you could, but once you form a civilization, and once you have more people around you, is that really the way to go? Will that really result in success for everybody? No. You can say this is how you want to live, and I have no objection to that.
But see, you keep appealing to success when I've asked for what success is, and you've equated it with pragmatism and what works. So I'm trying to figure out, where is the justification or explanation of what it is that makes pragmatism true and what actually is working? What does it mean to work? You say, well, it's not one guy kind of setting up his own thing. It's everybody kind of working together. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying that is not self-evident. I want to know why that's the case, or what is the justification for that? It
is. If I want to go out and want to kill people and want to take everything that they have, if I think that is good for me, then I am basically shortening my own life and endangering my own life by turning that.
That's begging the question, because maybe I get a lot of pleasure out of a wild 20 years as opposed to a sublime, subdued 50 years.
Of course. But society eventually doesn't come to conclude that, yes, we should just go ahead with that because it is pleasurable. I mean, it is kind of a logical conclusion. If you want to appeal to the argument that societies have always believed in something, for example, which is why there probably is something, then you could say societies have always come to eventually conclude that they should put their disagreements aside, establish certain rules, because we have to be calm, we have to respect each other, because that is better for us. We all, even if you want to live your life wildly and want to take everyone's possessions, it eventually doesn't work. Your life gets shorter. You live with less peace.
Right, but no, so okay. The explanation, right?
It doesn't give you peace. It doesn't give you peace. It doesn't result in a desirable life.
These are all circular arguments. I'm asking for why. You can't just say because this is better. I want to know like what the standard is to know. Maybe it's actually better to have a lot of death, chaos, and destruction.
Why?
Why not?
On what basis is it better?
Right, exactly. On what basis is it or isn't better? I mean, as a Christian,
if you could justify that, why could it possibly be better for societies to just conclude, hey, it's the right thing to just constantly be violent to each other, kill each other, and just to take from each other?
I mean, there have been plenty of important thinkers and philosophers who have held to that view.
It's a stupid view, I would say, because it doesn't make sense that you cannot give an example of one society.
On what basis? Again, so you have, in order to justify a claim, you have to be able, for example, to explain how it's coherent in the rest of what you believe. It has to have explanatory power, right? So justifying something as a claim, you can't just appeal to, well, it works, and it works because it makes things better, and it makes things better because people live longer. Those are not justifications. I want to know why we should prefer that to living shorter and having a lot wilder time. I'm not saying I believe that. I'm saying that there's nothing that's self-evident that tells you to prefer one over the other, just like there's nothing self-evident that tells you to prefer quantitative pleasure over qualitative pleasure. This is a classic problem for utilitarianism.
I understand that, which is why it is argued that utilitarianism cannot be objective or cannot be subjective. There are both sides to that whole discussion, and for that exact reason, for the exact objection that you're bringing, it is a claim that utilitarianism cannot be objective, that pragmatism cannot be objective, and because there is always the one person in society who doesn't want to play by the rules and who
it doesn't even have to be one person. I mean, they're
sure.
All, right.
Sure. But the thing is, I am not. Here is the issue. I am saying this is seemingly better for humans in the long run. It is seemingly better for humans in the long run.
On what basis is it better?
I'm explaining. This is seemingly better for humans in the long run, to make peace and to work toward making their own lives better in order to live better, to have peace, to have what they desire, which is comfort in life. Anything else just brings you back to living a constantly anxious life where you run and you are in fear. You have to look over your shoulder all the time, and you have to kill and survive.
Okay. I understand that we want that, but that's not an argument.
I know. I completely understand that, and I completely understand that there may be one person, or maybe 100 people, or maybe millions of people who think, "Hey, I don't want to live that way. I want to live my life wildly. I want to have fun, and I enjoy living by just killing other people and shedding blood and whatever it is." But the thing is, that is true. People can have that idea, but When has that ever become the norm in the long term? It has never, ever been established to be a system that people eventually agreed upon. It has never worked. It has never gone that way.
Well, I mean, there's ambiguity there, because empires, for example, they rise on conquering, and then they fall. I mean, the very example that you get with Mongols, right? I mean, you can get this kind of a situation of them rising and falling, and oftentimes empires fall prey to over extending in terms of their expansion, colonialism, and then eventually the empire collapses from within, usually by things like money printing or debt or something like this. So, I mean, there's an ebb and a flow to history, but what I'm saying is more fundamental than that, that in an epistemic sense, I'm asking for a justification for the argument that you're making. And all I'm saying is that you keep making a circular appeal to the fact that it makes things better, and it makes things better because it works, and it works because it makes things better. And I'm just saying that that's not a valid argument.
Well, the thing is, you're asking for something that we can never conclude, that we can never agree upon. You are asking for an objective.
As an atheist, though, you believe in doing logic and arguing logic.
No. You're asking for an objective basis for a morality upon which we can agree that something is good.
So there's nothing objective about morals?
Such a basis cannot exist.
Is that objectively the case about morals, that there's no objective truth about morals?
But it cannot be true. I mean, as far as, if you look at it religiously,
is that universally the case?
That claim itself. The claim that there cannot be an objective basis, yes, it is true.
Okay, so it's self-refuting. So there's a universal claim about morals, that morals cannot have universal claims.
Well, no, that is. I would classify that as sophistry. I mean,
no, it's not sophistry if it's an argument about basic principles.
Well, it doesn't refute the point. You are demanding that there must be an objective basis. That there must be an objective.
No, I'm not demanding. I'm asking you to explain your position, and you said that there are objective truths about morals. Namely, the one is that there is no objective truth about morals. It's not sophistry, unless you think all contradictions are sophistry.
I don't think that is objective. I would say this is in the greater interest. Most people desire this, but this cannot be objective, as I said.
Well, but you did say it was objective. Now you're saying that it's not. I mean, you did use the phrase that it is objectively the case that there's no objective morals.
No, I said it is objectively the case that there cannot be an objective basis.
That's an objective claim that's universal about morals.
That is true, but
okay, thank you.
that is true, but you cannot.
That's a contradiction.
It's not. That doesn't make sense. You cannot expect there to be an objective basis for morals.
It's the argument that you made. You made the argument that it's a.
but that doesn't make sense. That's a fallacy. I mean, you cannot expect.
It is a fallacy. Correct. Right.
You cannot expect there to be an objective basis for moral values if something like that simply cannot exist. It simply cannot exist. It's simply not logical for that to exist.
Okay, that's a universal claim, right?
No, I mean,
you just said it cannot. Those are strong words in logic.
Sure, but
cannot. So those are like universal quantifiers in logic.
Yes, but you cannot. You cannot say that is a contradiction. That's simply it doesn't make sense. No.
Well, it doesn't make sense because it's a contradiction.
There is no objectivity in this. And just because you say
universal claim that requires objectivity.
Well, you could say some people may argue that there are objective moral values and that there is an objective basis for moral.
No, I'm not doing that. I'm looking at the claim that you made.
There is no contradiction in that.
There is.
No, you would have to explain how it.
Because it's a universal claim that says there are no universal claims. That's a contradiction.
That is not a point. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense because it's not consistent. It's a contradiction.
No, I don't even know how to respond to that. I cannot even think of an equivalent to that argument because it simply doesn't make sense to me. But you cannot say that the non-existence of objective moral values contradicts with the idea that objective moral values cannot exist, or no, that the non-existence of objective moral values is a contradiction to the claim that there can be nothing objective. You cannot claim that because it simply cannot exist.
Right. So there are no universal claims is a universal claim. When you add this word "no," that's a strong claim. You see, that is itself a universal claim. So that's contradiction.
What is your solution to that?
Well, I don't make the claim that there are no universal objective truths.
What is your solution? Your solution to that is that there must be an objective basis for moral values, and you base that judgment on the claim.
I base the argument first on this transcendental argument that this doesn't work. So therefore, since this is self-refuting, there are universal claims.
That doesn't make sense. It
doesn't
prove
Book
anything.
4 of Aristotle, where he makes the same argument. I mean, it's an argument that's been around for a long time. I'm not trying to be.
No, I know, but that's an argument for the existence of God. I mean, it is.
Hold on. No. In Book 4, it's not an argument for God.
Sorry, no. For the existence of an exterior of a system upon which morality is depends on something that we do not decide. This argument has moved it out of the domain of morals and just into the domain of universal claims. And when Aristotle makes this argument in Book 4, he's just making an argument for how you have to believe in objective, immaterial things, like logic. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Right? So we're not necessarily talking about God right now. I'm just saying that this form of argument that I'm using here is an ancient argument. It's been used for a long time. It's a type of transcendental argument, which just shows in this reductio that you can't make a all-encompassing universal quantifier claim about all states of affairs and then turn around and say there are no all states of affairs. You see,
the thing is that in itself is actually circular reasoning. The claim is that there must be a core to the whole to the whole moral argument, for morality to exist, for meta-ethics to exist, which is exterior to our discussions.
But level arguments are circular, correct?
So yeah, that is the case then. The whole so we are judging the whole argument that objective moral values cannot exist. That claim is a contradiction because it contradicts with itself.
Right.
With the claim that there is nothing objective.
Right.
We simply base that judgment on our own man-made expectation that there must be such a consistency in the world.
No, it's not man-made. It's the
argument.
That is the argument. The argument is that to claim that it's not objective leads to self-refutation. That itself is an argument.
Of course, but that argument is completely based on the assumption that there must be such a rule. That rule.
No, the argument demonstrates that it is the case.
No, it's simply it attempts to do so. It attempts to do so by creating a rule, but upon which
creating a rule. Logic is not created; it's discovered. That's the thing. Fine. I mean, if it was created, could we create it otherwise?
It is like saying, for example, that it is the same thing with the whole existence of God. If you want to go back to, if we would go back, I'm not going back right now, but
let me ask you if you think this is valid, because this is another form of the same type of argument. If I said X is the necessary condition of Y, and then I posit Y, therefore X, right?
You are saying that, yeah, I know.
If Y is the case, and Y can only be if X, if I posit Y, therefore X, right? So that's,
I know, but the argument here is one objective is about one thing, while the other objective is about the other thing. The one claim is that there can be no objective basis for moral values, and then you're asking me whether I think that is an objective claim, an objective claim.
Yeah, because it has that word. There can be no.
I say yes, and you say that's a contradiction, but you're simply saying that's a contradiction because you're evaluating both of these claims based on the assumption that that one kind of objectivity is equal to the other kind of objectivity, that these two things are equal in meaning. It's like arguing that
you've lost me there. I don't know what you're saying.
It is like arguing that for everything to exist, God must exist, and if everything exists, or everything must have been created.
I'm not making these arguments.
I know, but it is similar to the argument that in order for everything to exist, there must be a creator, and if everything exists, then
I don't make a first cause argument.
Of course, but it is very similar
to that. It is
very similar to the argument.
No, that's a classical argument. Transcendental arguments have a different form than all the classical arguments. Okay. You could take a classical argument for God and put it into a transcendental form, but they're two different types of arguments.
Mm-hmm. But again, we should probably move away slowly from this. But because we're not talking about the existence of God. I thought that's what this discussion was supposed to be about. Probably my fault.
Well, I mean, I did say early on that when I talk about abstract objects and these kinds of formal arguments, those are the types of arguments that I believe are the most convincing, the strongest arguments for God's existence.
Well, as said, the whole discussion, the whole argument is simply based on the premise that the claim that objective moral values cannot exist, or an objective basis for moral values cannot exist, and that in and of itself is an objective claim, which is why it is illogical and doesn't make sense. But there has been a whole discussion on that, and I'm not a philosopher myself. I'm by no means professional. I'm self-educated. I have introduction philosophy education, plenty of self-education, all that stuff. So I would definitely not be able to go into all the counter arguments on that. But it is simply circular reasoning.
Okay, well, I'm not trying to be. We can move on. We don't have to obsess over this, but it doesn't take like a training to see that those are two contradictory claims. I'm not trying to be mean to you. I'm just saying that.
No, I don't think it's contradictory.
They are on the surface, contradictory claims.
Yeah, I don't think it's contradictory because I don't think it is necessary to say that we have to. I don't think it is necessary to judge the whole statement that there can be no objective moral values by the same expectation, by the same standard that this is an objective statement, which is why it is wrong, because I just said there are no objective moral values. I simply do not think that is a contradiction, because those two observations of objectivity are not the same thing. They're entirely different. If I say something cannot exist,
well, when you say that there are no and cannot, they don't have the normal meaning that they're supposed to have?
No, if I say something cannot exist, then it simply means that thing does not exist. I don't have to somehow be logically consistent in that issue. If something doesn't exist, then it doesn't exist.
If you don't have to be logically consistent in claims about what does and doesn't exist, then why should we believe in skepticism or atheism?
No, it is illogical to expect that there are objective moral values when such a thing simply cannot be true. It simply cannot exist. Or
you keep saying and asserting that, and then when I ask how you can have access to a universal state of affairs like that,
okay, maybe you're maybe the whole assumption goes to conclude or to expect of me, for example, to present the idea that there can be no objective goal or no objective value, no objective aim for humans. I would say it is in every human's best interest to live a comfortable life. Every human, we know psychologically.
So, but again, you're right. But you're using all of these qualifiers that are universal. They're called every, right? You're saying every it is.
No, this is a fact. We know that every human seeks comfort.
Okay, but you just said there's no objective states of affairs.
I would say if we are arguing about an ethical framework, about ethical frameworks, there can be no world in which.
Okay. Can I ask a metaphysical question about ethical frameworks themselves at a meta level? And can I ask you on what basis do you have knowledge claims about ethics? And that's when it transfers into the domain of universal claims. You see, You can keep saying that. I don't think there's universal objective ethics. I understand that. But when you start to say things about all states of affairs, it doesn't matter whether it's about ethics or other stuff, that's when you're starting to get into what are called universals. And that's the problem that we're at here, is that if you are an atheist, you really don't have a way to explain or justify the ability to make universal claims. I'm not saying that you don't or can't do it. You are doing it, but rather to justify how you can do that. Okay, now, in the Christian paradigm, we can do it because we believe that we're made in the image of God.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is the one thing that I may be stuck on, which is that I would argue it is not possible to say that there is one framework, one ethical framework that should be considered universal, and that is objectively true.
Okay,
that it is not possible to say that.
Right? But in logic, okay,
I see.
You're making really strong claims.
I know.
Strong claims.
I know.
Transfers it into the domain of universals and so forth.
Okay. Let me get somewhere. In psychology, people have concluded. It has been concluded about, I believe, 30 years ago, that it was kind of a brilliant insight that children, that offsprings of mammals seek comfort. That it is universal of all of us. That we naturally seek comfort. We seek this physical closeness to a mother, for example. This comfort is something that offsprings of monkeys desire. They desire it more than food. They need food for survival, which is true. But more than desiring this one necessity, which is food, they desire to be close to a mother, to somebody physically, in order to feel comfort. Thereby, it has been established that it is absolutely true that humans seek comfort. Humans all want comfort, and whether you find that comfort by living a rather peaceful life or by asserting your power over the rest of humanity and shedding blood, that is debatable. But what is true is that yes, we are all seeking comfort in life. That is pretty much a scientific conclusion, and that is, yes, indeed, objectively true. That is objectively true. That humans and other mammals desire comfort. Now,
hold on. Do you think that's universally true?
I think that's universally true. Yes.
Do you have access to universal states of affairs?
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, you're a finite guy. I assume that you probably believe in empirical research, right? Mm-hmm. Does empirical research ever get you to a universal state of affairs?
Well, as said, this is based on the scientific method by which we conclude, we conclude that this is our observation. This is what we prove based on this number, based on this control group. We see that this is a universal behavior.
But it's not.
And if it doesn't exist, then there is a disorder in play. For example, this is the current conclusion in psychology. If somebody doesn't seek this comfort, then there is a mental disorder in play, a personality disorder, or a mood disorder in play. This is the expectation, the nature that people and other mammals have. So that is actually concluded. If in the future there was a point and humans came to the conclusion, hey, yes, this was maybe not entirely true.
Okay,
maybe
so
there's something different to it.
Universal state of affairs.
At the point it is. I mean, at the point we think that it is, and that's
so universal truth claims can turn into the opposite of themselves.
Well, in the scientific method, that's how things work.
But that's why the scientific method can't give you universal states of affairs and truth claims.
Of course, we can only agree that this is what we currently think is true. This is what we've.
Then it's not universal.
This is what we currently know is true based on.
That means that it's not universal.
It is pretty much irrefutable. It can only alter in the way that insofar that
you just said it can be different in the future. So it's not pretty much irrefutable.
Details about it can change. We can say, oh, there was this detail about this specific thing that we know that was not exactly the way we know it is, but we know for a fact that humans seek comfort. This is universal. A stable, healthy human being.
So I think I'm not trying to be mean, but I don't think you're clear on what a universal is or what a universal claim is.
No, I am. And the claim that the conclusion.
So what you just said is not a universal claim if it can be altered.
The details of it can be altered. The why we want it and how we can find comfort differently can be altered based on further findings in the future.
But you don't get a universal from particulars. How from this particular to this particular to this particular?
The idea that
universal state of affairs. What
I know.
Whereas so ideas are universal.
No, I'm saying the idea that humans seek comfort, that is a universal truth. If we only
that that's a universal truth?
We only make exceptions to that based on people who have disorders, for example, which is why we call disorders, because it doesn't agree with the nature.
I understand that you believe that, But how do you know that that's a universal truth epistemically? How do you derive that
we
certitude?
simply know that. We simply know that. We simply we
That's
search.
a circular argument.
No,
That's an ad hoc. We simply know it. That you can't say that just is.
That was a wrong choice of words. I agree. That was a wrong choice of words. We know that by making the research and by concluding that
that's a circular argument. So the empirical research is known by the circular empirical research.
Then you cannot assert that anything out there is true at all. That we cannot know the nature about anything. That we can.
No, I don't believe that universals are known by empirical sense data.
Well, as far as I understand, it is pretty much it is possible. We know by going through something over and over again and having abundant results and observations in a matter.
So I would recommend.
For example, we know that dinosaurs
exist. That's not giving you a universal principle, right? So
we know, for example, that dinosaurs exist simply based on the fact that we have observed their bones.
You're missing the argument. So David Hume makes this point about induction, which is that the mere fact that you observe 20 different instances of some phenomena does not give you a universal rule or justification for belief in a universal rule. I'm not saying that you can't posit those things, but there's a difference between positing something and believing something and giving an explanation and a justification for that belief.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I see your point, but I think this pretty much established that this research, for example, if we have enough data, it is concluded that this is something that is absolutely that is universally true.
Have you read Kuhn?
No.
Okay, so Structures of Scientific Revolution shows that in various centuries, scientific revolutions occur that change entire paradigms. So what you said right there would be totally contrary to Kuhn.
Okay. Well, fine. Let's move. We can move away from that. We can move to the whole idea of why we believe in the existence of God. But the whole idea of that was how can I judge? I think that was your question at the very beginning. How can I judge God's judgment? On what basis of morality can I judge that? That was your whole question. Then we went into how I can come to objective moral conclusions, what my basis for my morality is. We went into a whole bunch of detail there, but as said, the whole claim at the beginning was that it simply seems illogical, inconsistent within itself, that God would create everything, make certain moral rules, and judge humankind unjustly so much that it is impossible for each one of us to for every one of us to come to the conclusion that God exists. You said, sure, we don't know what happens after death. We don't know how God judges people, but we do know that we are all created as flawed human beings, according to the Christian narrative, and that we are then, as flawed human beings, judged based on whether we are convinced that God exists or not, although it is in our very nature to have doubts and to come to wrong conclusions. For example, if I question God's existence my entire life, and if I really want to believe, if I really want to listen to that inner me, which apparently, according to many theologians, has the right answer, and if I eventually come to the conclusion, hey, I don't think this is true, I think this is wrong, and I really want to believe it, but I don't believe in it, then I will be, by God's judgment, by the New Testament, judged and sent to eternal punishment because I didn't believe, and that simply doesn't seem logical. And I don't think I need to justify based on which moral basis I judge this. I think it is simply internally moral. It is internally logically inconsistent, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I hear your objections. They seem to be kind of repeating the objections at the beginning. I think I addressed most.
That's where we were, weren't we? That's where we were, and we didn't move on from that because we didn't solve the paradox here.
So my response to that would be that when we get into standards of judgment, when we get into questions of ethical norms, how we make value judgments, what happens is we're moving into the domain of higher order stuff, right? Abstracted stuff, universal types of claims, judgments, categories. And what I'm saying is that my argument, the transcendental argument, if you want it in summation, is that if we're looking for justification for our claims, if we're looking for explanatory power, if we're looking for coherence in the paradigm, the Christian paradigm offers an explanation for that higher level stuff that I just listed that's actually assumed or undergirds the scientific method, moral judgments, and analyzing history. All of those different things are assuming logic, assuming abstract categories, assuming these kinds of non-empirical things that undergird the empirical operations. And even things like language and communication presuppose these kinds of metaphysical structures and reality. And I would say that only the Christian paradigm justifies or explains and gives coherence to those higher order things that actually are presupposed in any moral judgment, any scientific operation, any analysis of history, etc.
But doesn't that mean
that itself is the argument?
But doesn't that mean we're moving away from a paradox that we cannot solve because we don't have a proper explanation to it, and appeal to other reasons why we think God does exist and why Christianity is true? And that also based on conclusions like you gave, for example, a logical argument, a logical conclusion based on which you think the Christian God exists, or based on which you think God exists. But it doesn't directly point at the existence of a God. It merely points at the possibility of a God, or the possibility of the Christian God.
I see. No, I would argue that when we get to the next stage of the argument, when we look at these abstract principles, that they actually require a certain type of God, and that's how I would make the move to the Christian God.
In how far does it require that there is a certain God, that there is that there is one God who created everything?
Well, for example, if I were to talk about the abstract objects that are the patterns of this world, they can't just be in an ether. They have to be in some single divine mind. And so that right there would be one indicator that the location or the grounding, so to speak, of all of these abstract principles and objects can't just be out there chaotically. They can't just be located in a human mind. They have to be in some mind, and it can't be just any mind. It has to be a kind of mind that gives it intention and purpose. And so that's why it's a God who's a creator, a personal God, and not like a abstract force like the Greeks believed in or something like that, right? Like Plato believed in forms or higher levels of reality, but he thought that they were kind of impersonal. And I'm saying that there's an interesting insight there. I'm not a Platonist, but I'm saying that it makes more sense to say that reality is at its highest level personal and not impersonal. And so therefore reality in life has meaning as a whole because it's all sort of structured from the divine mind.
Doesn't that, boiled down, it basically sounds to me like all of this looks like there has to be a designer or a creator, which is why.
No, I'm not making a teleology argument.
I don't understand how we come to the conclusion that points at a single creator who has created everything. I don't see a solid proof or argument that should conclude in yes, there is one creator who is or God is true. I don't see how we get there. So maybe I don't understand.
What would you posit? Two gods? So all the abstract objects are what, split down the middle between one God and another God? I mean, it's very easy to refute dualism if that's your positive. That would make all of reality ultimately chaotic. I think that's pretty easy to refute.
The Quran makes that same claim. The Quran, for example, says I dealt with that whole question when I was a Muslim. It basically says if there were more gods, as the polytheists believe, then there would be great disorder or there would be chaos. So it basically makes.
I'm not just talking about chaos in the world. I'm saying that for abstract objects, the type of objects that they're invariant, they're immaterial, they're non-spatial. They require to be grounded in something beyond the physical or beyond the human mind. So we're limited in the types of things that we could ground it in. So if we were to try to say, oh, the universals and these kinds of things are in the minds of the gods, it wouldn't make any sense because the gods fight one another. So you have universals fighting one another, and it's just ludicrous, right? But if there's a single divine mind that undergirds and gives coherence to not just universals, but all of these kinds of abstract objects, that makes sense. That's a coherent paradigm. I'm not saying it's true because I posit it. I'm saying it's coherent, and that is what lends the strength and the force of the argument is that the whole paradigm is coherent. I'm not saying that it's true because I'm asserting it, right? And I'm saying that when we can compare a paradigm where we have one divine mind that is the undergirding and structure of reality, as opposed to a paradigm where it's materialism, it's pure chaos, it's a bunch of competing gods or something like that, those systems are not coherent.
It doesn't make sense to me why we would assume that if there was more than one god, or if there were multiple gods, or if there were two gods, then they would be competing, or they would be
Well, we have a whole history of polytheism, and that's what goes down in polytheism. So if you want to construct a whole new polytheism, maybe you could make that argument.
Well, that's what they thought. That's probably a reasonable thing for people to believe, that gods are basically higher beings that also are after power, that basically have these human desires, and that they would eventually end up fighting each other, asserting power over each other, and so on. But I would say that that's a logical assumption that people probably had back then. But if we're talking about God, and if we're talking about this God that has to have a specific nature that is far above us and that is perfect, why can't we imagine a system where 8 gods exist, or infinite gods exist, that are all naturally in harmony with each other?
So there's other philosophical things that I could bring in at this point, like the argument from the one and the many. So we can't have a true unity of multiplicity in the world if the highest principle that we are locating this in is also distinct and separate beings, right? So if they're ultimately one and many at the same time, and that's the triune God, our God is unique in that regard, and that he's Father, Son, and Spirit. In that regard, there's an ultimacy to both perfect unity and perfect multiplicity. We don't put those in like a dialectical tension. And if you were to say that the highest level of reality was multiple different gods that are separate beings, then I would say that wouldn't work. You would not have a transcendent unity.
Okay.
But anyway, but that's called the one and the many. This is a famous problem in the history of philosophy.
If we come back to though the existence of a God in and of itself, and what points at the existence of a creator, of something that has to have brought all of this forth, or that has to have created all of us. Like, how do we come to that? As I see it, all that we have is we look around us, we see the universe, we see the world, we see beings, we see people die, we see people born, we see that stuff happens in the sky, and we think, well, okay, there has to be a creator to something. There has to be some creator to all of this. This cannot just exist on its own. So there must be a creator. That's how far I see it. That's how far I see the argument goes. How much does it go?
For us, the doctrine of creation is a revealed doctrine. So this is a doctrine that is in Scripture. Now, the ultimate authority for us, or our highest epistemic authority, would be divine revelation. So I'm not going to appeal to the claims of science necessarily as if that's above revelation. I believe that true scientific discoveries do not contradict divine revelation. I don't have a problem with science. I think science is actually comes out of Byzantium and orthodox theology, historically speaking. So I don't have a problem with universities and science. But for us, the highest epistemic authority is going to be divine revelation. So I'm going to say that the Scripture tells us the origin of the world. That's my first argument, and I accept it on the basis of the fact that God revealed it. And I know that God revealed it because of the arguments that I've been presenting in this stream. I would say that would be my holistic approach. So I don't do like evidentialist apologetics. I do like a holistic kind of transcendental argument. But then I would also say that there are other arguments from science that do attest to the doctrine of creation. I think that philosophically speaking, something like cyclical eternal return is self-refuting. I'm familiar with you mentioned that being supposedly an older view. That's based on the presuppositions of unbelieving history, saying that it's an older view. I don't think that it's an older view. I think that it's a later view that is basically perhaps created by Indo-Europeans or perhaps Egyptians, and then transfers into Greek philosophy. But yes, most of the Greeks believed in a kind of cyclical eternal return. Nietzsche rehashes this in Modernity. I think it's very easy to refute that, because it would basically boil down to the idea that everything that we seem to experience as change is illusory. If you follow through with that argument, and if everything that we see as change is illusory, that kind of means that our experience in this world is illusory, and that oftentimes falls over into like a Far Eastern Maya type of view. This is why a lot of people who get into like Greek philosophy or really deep into like Nietzschean type of stuff, they will usually fall into these kinds of influences of Buddhism or dualism or monism, and you can kind of go either way with those views, but we don't believe any of those things. So we think that there is a kind of a necessity to history having a linear scheme and it having a beginning, a middle, and an end. I think our lives have beginning, middle, and ends, and I think that beginning, middle, and an end is actually a transcendentally necessary category. We're beings that are so constituted to interpret the world that way, and if you deny that, I think it leads to the impossibility of knowledge at all. It doesn't really make sense. I mean, I wouldn't even know what it means to say that there's no such thing as beginning, middle, and an end.
It's funny. I was smiling because I just listened to an analysis of that whole thing, basically of everything that you have just described, just yesterday or the day before, because I was listening to lectures regarding Nietzsche's view of the recurring cycle of life, and
right.
Yeah, it's just
sorry. Have you watched True Detective?
What?
Have you watched the show True Detective?
No, I haven't.
You should watch season 1. It's pretty awesome because there's a scene when Matthew McConaughey is referencing Nietzsche, and he makes this point. He's like, "You ever think about history as a flat circle that just goes around for all eternity?"
Nice. I'll have a look. No, I would think there is a great absurdity in the Indian, the Indic belief, the dharmic belief, whatever you want to call it. Mostly that life is all about that there is a creation, that life is about release from this cycle of suffering, that this will all come back and re-emerge again and again. I think it's to be honest, I would think it's a bunch of nonsense. It is unfounded. But then again, as far as I understand, your biggest reason to believe that there must be a creator is the scripture, the revelation.
That's my first appeal, but I'm not going to say that's the only. Yeah, I mean, I would make philosophical arguments too. Sure.
But how can we have to, when we look at monotheism, when we look at Christianity, for example, we see the whole, correct me if you think I'm kind of misleading somewhere with this, but God existed. There was nothing but God in the beginning. And God was above the waters, and God created everything. God created heaven. God created Adam and Eve so that they can witness his glory. Then he created this rule for them in heaven. Adam and Eve made a mistake or committed an evil act because they were misled by the serpent. And then God created from them their offspring and punished them with this with original sin. And now we are to live in this temporary life. Each one of us, on average nowadays, 70 years on this temporary life on this planet that we have, that humans have developed civilizations on for thousands of years, just to eventually die and go to a heaven where we will then permanently exist together with God to witness his glory and to glorify him. And for some reason, God created this. And for some reason, for many thousands of years, many people around the world, most people around the world, never heard any of that stuff. And then Jesus came along 2,000 years ago and started declaring the good news to his own people, and then to the other people through the Romans converting to Christianity, for example. And this suddenly became this universal movement. But for a long time, we have people who heard none of that stuff. We still have the majority of mankind that will not listen to or abide by Christianity. And for some reason, God created all of us, and God created this strange system. Why would this be a reasonable thought?
So a lot of what you said, so you started off pretty accurate in terms of our view. Then it sort of trailed off into more like a Protestant kind of idea of like when you die, you just kind of go and be this ghost in a ethereal floating realm with God. But it's different.
Can you clarify that with Orthodox Christianity?
Yeah, like we don't think that the creation of man was just merely to kind of trick man and see if he would fall. It was more so that the original intention was we believe that Jesus was always going to become incarnate. That was the original intention of God, was to overcome different obstacles, you could even say, like one being that God desired out of his own goodness to share with other beings his own life and his own goodness, his own being. And so he created the world ultimately to become one of us, right? To become man, not because to punish us, but actually to raise us. And so to raise us to a greater and greater status to become sons of God. This is actually what we believe made Satan envious, because he was an angel. He believed that angels should have had that preeminence and that not men, because men were lower on the status of God's creation, you could say, Psalm 8. And so that's what kind of prompts this testing. Yes, God knew this, but God also had from the beginning the plan, as we said, to become incarnate. And it's the action of Jesus becoming incarnate that raises man, right? So because he's divine, because he's the Son of God, his divinity is what overcomes the power of death in human nature. And when he did that, it didn't just require him like taking on a body. He also went into the realm of the dead, Hades, as I said earlier, which is where he went and preached the gospel, Peter says, to the dead, and thereby exposed all those people that you were saying had never heard about him to him. So we don't think that God's unfair. We think that he is demonstrating his fairness by that action, according to St. Cyril. And then in the resurrection, what he does is destroy the power of death over human nature, right? The power of corruption that had been set into our nature. That doesn't mean that everybody's saved. It means that everybody's going to be resurrected. And so we don't believe in like this ethereal float away kind of mental realm. We believe that the heavens and the earth are recreated. So there'll be a return to what Eden was supposed to be all along. There will be a new heavens, a new earth. That's the return of that Edenic state, so to speak. So that's for us the redemptive scheme, redemptive history is summarized in that whole big, you could call it a drama if you wanted to. So it's not so much about like, the Protestant conceptions. It's more so of a grand cosmic metaphysical restoration.
But why would that whole thing take place? I mean, I know it's kind of a crude question, but why would God have this plan to begin with? I mean, how is it explained that you agree with the notion that God created humans to witness His glory, right? I think that is
well, not just to witness it, but also to experience it and to be raised into a what we call a state of theosis, to be deified. So God created us not to be destroyed, but to be sons of God, as I said, and to be like Christ, right? So when Jesus is resurrected, his body is freed from all of the passibility, decay, corruption that he willed to undergo in his death. And he does that so that we can partake of that life. And that we think is the gospel. That's why Paul says the resurrection is the gospel. So that's the purpose.
Well, I have two issues with that. The thing is, that one issue is so complicated that I have with that. I don't even know if I want to really go into it.
Well, let me say one last thing about that, because I mentioned at the beginning that one of the things I think is a really powerful testament or proof or attestation to Christianity, aside from like the philosophical arguments, would be that there's all manner of places, hundreds of years. Even the most liberal scholars would admit that hundreds of these verses and predictions are prior to Christ, right? Excuse me, hundreds of years. So you've got, Jeremiah, you've got Isaiah, you've got Hosea, you've got dozens and dozens and dozens of predictions. I could list Psalm 2, Psalm 8, Psalm 16, Psalm 18, Jeremiah 25, Jeremiah 3, Hosea 1, Habakkuk 2, 14, 15, Ezekiel 47. I got a whole, you could go through many, many more. Isaiah 25, Isaiah 24, 42, Amos 9, 11, 12, and Isaiah 49. What they're predicting is when a messianic figure comes, when the Messiah comes, one of the key signs they say will be that many, many, many of the Gentile nations will convert to worship the God of Israel. Now, if you think about it in the context of like people in Isaiah's day, if you were a Jew at that time, you would have thought that's crazy, right? What? Mm-hmm. How would vast numbers of Gentiles come to worship our Hebrew God? That seems crazy. Mm-hmm. And yet when Christ comes, the first thing that happens is that the church expands into the Roman Empire and begins to convert. And amazingly, Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 9, all those chapters in Daniel predict that the Messiah would be born under an empire that within a few centuries would be conquered by this gospel, by this Christian message, and would become the church. It would become the kingdom of God that Daniel says it's the kingdom of God, right? So when Jesus is going around, he keeps talking about how I'm about to set up this kingdom. I'm going to set up the kingdom of God. I'm going to draw all the nations, the Gentiles, to me. Mm-hmm. And so the church itself is a prophetic proof, I would say, of the fact that the Gentile nations have been brought into this prediction from centuries and centuries and millennia ago, that the Gentiles would come to worship the God of Israel. I mean, you can all go all the way back to Abraham, Genesis 12, 15, 17, 22. The promise to Abraham was that one of his descendants would be the person that would bring Gentile nations into covenant with the God of Israel.
Well, the issue that I have with this is one of many issues. Actually, I have 3 issues, but the issue that I want to raise right now in response to that is you would, for example, consider all of this clear proof, indication of how you think this was all meant to come about. But to the average Jew, for example, this would be simply dismissed as a Christian misconstruction of biblical texts in order to comfort and make it
that's funny because narrative. Hosea even says the Jews won't believe it when it happens.
Yeah, but the thing is, you can make these claims. For example, there's.
But by the way, that really doesn't have anything to do with the truth or falsity of the argument.
Okay, so this is not giving a supportive argument of. This is just a.
I mean, there are a lot of Jews who don't believe all kinds of things. So
okay, okay, I get it. What I'm saying is that it is how can we trust the scripture in telling us the truth? How can a random person like me read the scripture and trust it in telling us the truth when the average Jew, for example, thinks, hey, these people just misconstrued this to make it fit their narrative? For example, there was something funny that I came across in Exodus, I believe, or I don't know, wherever it was. But Muslims, for example, use a specific Old Testament Torah part to say that it prophesied Muhammad.
Right?
Yeah, that it prophesied Muhammad. Okay, yeah, Deuteronomy. The issue is that Christians use that same part to say that this actually prophesied Jesus, whereas Jews say, no, this didn't prophesy anybody. This just prophesied a future prophet, and that's all there is to it. And so you see that Muslims have their own interpretation by hijacking the scripture and turning it into something ridiculous, but they can do it, and people believe in that in huge numbers.
Yeah, but the difference here is the continuity, right? So the Muslim conception of continuity between the Old Testament prophets and Moses doesn't match up at all with what's in the Quran. And ironically, the first 10 surahs of the Quran consistently appeal to the law and the prophets as if they're correct, right? They even say that it's correct. There's, I think, 3 surahs that mention the fact that the Torah is fine, the prophets are good. I think it's Surah 3:3, 10:37, 94, 5:4-7, and 6:115 all say that the law and the prophets are correct. And then you get this other thing that Muslim apologists do where they say, oh, well, there's all these corrupted texts of the Jews and the Christians. And then they'll appeal within the very context of the text that they say are corrupted. So it's just moving the goalpost where they move it to wherever that proves Christianity. Well, then that's corrupted. So I don't think that I think that the easiest way to refute Islam in that regard is to just point out that on their own claims, they are inconsistent with the Old Testament, and Christianity is in fact perfectly consistent with the Old Testament.
Well, you can say that,
you're going to say, I know a Jew will say that it's not. Well, that's when you have to get into the text themselves to see that. There's really no way around that.
Well, to them there is. That's the issue. I mean, I don't.
No. I'm saying that there's no way to resolve this question.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
If you were to propose to me, how do you know that a Jew can't have a better answer to your dilemmas on the New Testament? I'm saying there's no way to do that without looking at the claims that are made. And what you'll find is that in a lot of the cases of rabbinic testimony, a lot of their testimonies even admit Christian positions. That's the irony here. There's a great book. I have a friend named Ken Ami, and he has a book about rabbinic testimonies to the validity and consistency of Christianity. And this is something that evolves over time. So you're right that, like, I'm not saying it's true just because I say that. You do have to actually get into the text. Yes.
Yeah. I'm saying I don't argue for or against any of those positions, but
Right.
but groups among themselves obviously do. And you made the point. Well, the issue that I had with this, most importantly, with the whole narrative that God.
Can I give you one funny example on that?
Sure, go ahead.
So Daniel 9 is a famous case where it has a prediction of the Messiah when the Messiah is born. And Jews do believe that a lot of these texts are messianic texts.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't think that it applies to Jesus. But Daniel 9 is a funny one because it's so specific, and it's about the fact that when the Messiah does come, one of the key signs will be that in his period there will be the removal of the temple. There will no longer a sacrifice. And of course, 40 years after Christ's ministry, you have the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And the rabbinic testimony on that passage is actually to pronounce a curse on anyone who's not a Jew that reads it. So that's one good testimony that we're actually correct on Daniel 9, is that they curse the people who read it because it's such a powerful testament to Christianity.
Well, if we want to go into discussing specific parts of the scripture and dismissing arguments that are made based on scripture or reinterpreting scripture in order to not believe a specific narrative, as a Christian would claim the Jews do, for example, I had this experience recently that I had a discussion in Turkish with a man who claims that he is a Jesus. He claims that he is the Messiah. He claims that he's Jesus reborn, that he's the Messiah, that he came to give us the good news again. That he also has his disciples by his side, who are all, as they were back then, by his side, just with new bodies in Turkish and all that stuff. So this guy really tries to convince us that he is the Messiah. And funnily enough, one of the main.
By the way, this is the book I was looking for. My friend who's written this. So he points out within, if anybody's interested in that topic, that is a good book.
Okay,
go ahead.
Thank you. So he actually, one of the arguments for him to claim that he's the Messiah, one of the strongest arguments that he points out, is actually one of my objections that I have when I look at the New Testament. I'm not saying this is my major argument against Christianity. I'm no expert in Christianity, although I have read about it quite a lot. And I don't base my disbelief in God on Christianity, but rather on the idea of God itself. But for example, in the New Testament, it is pointed out, it is, I think, mentioned once or twice, where Jesus is supposed to have told his disciples that none of them would leave, or that none of them would die, or that none of them would taste death, and that the kingdom of heaven, that the kingdom of God would come. Yes. Then
that relates to what I was just talking about.
Yeah. And if you read it like that, as it is, on the surface, it looks like it is a false prophecy. It looks like it is a wrong prophecy, where Jesus literally says that the prophesied end or future or new world, kingdom of God, will come before his disciples taste death.
It came in 70 AD. So if you look at, I know what the text you're talking about. If you look at Luke 21 and Matthew 24, especially if you read Luke 21, it shows that the Olivet Discourse is in the context of the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. In fact, he says in Luke 21 that when you see Jerusalem surrounded by enemies, know that its desolation is near. So he's referring to this abomination of desolation from Daniel. And if you think back to that period of the Maccabees, what Daniel talks about is what's in First Maccabees, and Maccabees is an intertestamental defiling of the temple by Antiochus Epiphanes. So this happens in, I think, the 2nd century BC by the Greek leader, and he sacrifices a pig on the altar, This is a foreshadowing of what Jesus is talking about that happens 40 years later, that Josephus describes as the eyewitness of the destruction of the temple by Titus Vespasian. And Titus comes in and defiles the temple, puts the Roman banners up, basically.
Okay.
So, and then afterwards, they raise the temple, they destroy it. And that's exactly what Jesus had said in Luke 21. He says, not one stone of this temple will be left up. And if you read Matthew 22, he says that this is judgment upon Israel for rejecting the Messiah.
Okay. Yeah, so the argument there is that the kingdom of God, the coming of the kingdom of God,
the kingdom of God is the church.
To establishing,
Correct.
The church. See, other people interpret that as the coming of the end of things, or as the resurrection.
Right. So the Orthodox view is that the 70 AD, the destruction of the temple, because the temple is an image of this world. The destruction of the temple is a type of the end of the world.
Okay. And my new supposedly I am Jesus guy in Turkish claims this is proof that I am Jesus, because Jesus said that none of his disciples would taste death, and the kingdom of God will come, and here I am again with my disciples, and the kingdom of God is coming now, because now they will taste death. That's what he says. So
within the Orthodox Church, we have the doctrine there's no new public revelation, so there can never be another person like that.
Well, he obviously reinterprets things as he goes along, but that's just one example to reinterpreting things. But actually, I've come a far way off what I was actually wanting to argue on, is why would God create humanity? Why would God create this whole system? And we talked about it. You said
the highest level of answer that we could give was just be that God wanted to communicate and share his own goodness and his own being.
But wouldn't that mean that God had a beginning, or that God had a history? That's at some point things began. It's at some point the history of God began. Like we like to describe God as this eternal being who has no beginning and no end, no time, whatever. But when we look at the scripture, for example, we see that it says, in the beginning there was God. And then he started creating things. But doesn't that imply that at some point things began? At some point creation began, and before creation began, there was only God, and it kind of looks like there was a time for him at which he created something, and before that, only God existed. Doesn't it look like
we believe that? Yeah.
Okay, doesn't it look like we are the ones who give meaning to God? It looks like God has a story, a history.
If I was a Muslim, that would be an argument I would make. Or excuse me, if you were a Muslim, that would be an argument I would make. I would say that for God to be God and Lord, he needs to be God, Lord of something, right? To be father of something, to be creator of something. And this is actually a problem, I would say, in Islamic theology, that they believe that God's name of creator is synonymous with eternal. And some of them will even affirm that he's an eternal creator. And so this kind of falls into a dilemma that's in Aristotle. To where the definition or explication of who God is dependent upon him being Lord, creator, mover, actualizer of something other than himself. And that would be creation in most schemes. So anybody who has a, quote, strict Unitarian monotheism will have that dilemma and that problem. But that's one of the reasons that we believe in the Trinity, is that we don't think that God's expression of his own self-existence and love and communication of attributes and glory and so forth is dependent upon creation, because it's shared amongst the persons of the Trinity.
But what does it? How does it solve the problem? I don't understand how it solves the problem of
because
God.
God's not dependent on creation to exercise his love and communion.
Sure, he's not. But my point would not be that he is dependent on it, but rather that he created us at some point, which means that it basically looks like that is when God became relevant. And before that, God only existed by himself, and God only existed in nothingness. And
it's not nothingness or irrelevance. It's a triune God, Father, Son, and Spirit, with perfect unity and perfect communication of love and communion. So for us, that's the highest level of reality that conditions and gives meaning to our reality. So it's man who is becoming relevant, not God.
Okay. that feels like a very arrogant thing to believe of humans. That it looks like we are the ultimate meaning of the universe, the ultimate
We
meaning
are,
of everything, the focus of God, the focus of everything
but we
in
are
the world.
because God is become man. That's the only reason that we are what we are. So it's not arrogant because if God wills it to be that way.
Mhm. And God did that because he wanted to, because he desired it, because he felt the desire, the will
Yeah,
to be.
out of his own overflowing goodness, he willed to become man so that we could experience God and be like God.
But if it is about his goodness, then why did he create a system in which we need to be raised and purified in order to be part of his goodness, and otherwise we are
Yeah.
left out and punished?
So there's different possible answers that you could give to that question. I think you could potentially argue a Leibniz type of argument that the best type of universe would be the universe where more of God's attributes are displayed, because we don't just think that it's a thing that we see about God. We actually participate in God. We believe. That's our belief. And so a situation where God displays more of his attributes, such as his mercy and forgiveness, that's better than a universe where there was basically just robots or automatons and so forth. So God, in his infinite wisdom, knew that a universe where there's free will in the long run, and the omniscient scheme that he knows, is better than a universe where there was not free will. That's the best answer that we could give.
But he could have eventually created. I mean, isn't the premise that so we have free will, and because we have free will, we are unable to do evil, to commit evil, which is why we have to be sorted out and punished for that evil.
Well, wait, say that again. What now?
So we have to. A world with free will is the best possible thing, and if we have free will, then we also have to have evil. Evil also has to exist.
Oh, I see.
Where
No,
does that come?
we don't believe that. So we make a distinction between free will in the sense of the ability to choose or will multiple goods, distinct goods, as opposed to what we characterize as the post-fall notion of free will, which is a choice between good and evil. So we think that in the eschaton, there will no longer be a choice of evil, but there will be multiple goods to have. So there will still be free will because you can still choose multiple goods. But that's a kind of an obtuse arena. But this is actually an area where we disagree with Western theology. In Roman Catholic theology, this is known as the beatific vision, which we don't believe that.
Okay, the question would remain that. So the question was to go back to the question is so God creates us to witness or to live, to experience his glory, to experience him. Right. He creates us into this world. He creates us with free will. The fall happens, but the fall is supposed to happen as part of the plan, right? So it is part of the plan that something goes wrong, that evil occurs, and that we thereafter are.
So God permitting something is not the same thing as God intentionally causing something. So I would not say that it was part of the plan for man to fall, because I was saying that we believe that man is patterned on Christ being incarnate. We're made in the image of Christ. So we think that it was always the case that Christ was going to become incarnate, even if man had not fallen.
That leaves us with thinking God did create us without creating a punishment for us, but we exist because we are told or taught that a fall happened, which we know from Scripture, which is why we live our lives right now in ignorance and evil, and could eventually misuse our free will and end up in hell forever. But and you're saying just because God permitted that to happen, that doesn't mean that God intended that to happen, or God made that happen.
No, I said there's a distinction between God permitting something and him actively causing something.
Okay, but if he permits that, I mean, isn't that supposed to be part of God's plan? Isn't that supposed to be God creates everything and he knows that the fall will happen? Or it is such a big thing, such a big event, that it completely disrupts the entire system, that it disrupts everything that is going on, disrupts the entire planet. Suddenly we are left to decide between good and evil, and eventually suffer forever if we choose evil unknowingly. And
So I see. So you're trying to make an argument about the problem of evil, and why would there be a problem of evil at all if
uh
God knew all along that there would be the existence of
yeah,
evil, and therefore it's not consistent that we would be punished for that. But again, this is ignoring the fact that why can't God set up a world where there is free will? Like, what's inconsistent about that?
why would he need to create evil for that to happen? He could simply create a world where free will
It's not
exists.
creating evil; it's permitting evil.
That is just one way of saying creating, because
No, this is actually a big debate in the history of a lot of different philosophies and religions as to whether evil has some kind of existence or not. We don't
sure.
think that it does. So for us, God creating men with the ability to will to move away from him, or angels to move away from him, is, we don't know the ultimate reason why, other than that he did, and he did it for a good reason. And the best speculation that we could come up with is that that's a universe where we do see the explication of, or the manifestation, I should say, of more of God's attributes than a universe where he didn't allow those things, right? So a universe where he does punish evil manifests his justice and his mercy and his forgiveness. A universe where he doesn't, and that's not inconsistent. Hear me out on this. It's not inconsistent within the Christian paradigm, because God is the highest good. And so if he's displaying and allowing the participation in more of his attributes than a universe where he doesn't, that's not inconsistent.
Okay, but according to your belief, according to the general belief, after this is over, and after we are resurrected, after we are where we are meant to be, and we go to heaven, we will still have free will, right?
Yes.
Will we then be able to commit evil and to be?
No, because free will is not primarily a choice between good and evil, but a choice between multiple goods.
That means that God could have created a world in which free will can exist, but we can also not make the choice to commit evil and to go to heaven.
Right. So, for example, in the Garden of Eden before the fall, Adam and Eve had free will. They still had free will before there was the introduction of evil. So they were choosing different things. We believe they still had free will. Then when Adam sinned, he chose evil willfully, we would say. And now that there's the introduction of a new state of affairs, to where, in our view, the fall affected all of reality, not just man in terms of death, but death, decay, and corruption in everything, plant life, right? The world as a whole. All of the universe is metaphysically affected, we believe, by the fall. So now we're in a situation where, typically speaking, when we say free will, we mean a choice between good and evil. But even in this life, there's still the ability to choose between multiple goods. And then in the eschaton, there will not be the choice of evil. There will be the return to the state prior, the pre-lapsarian state, I should say.
So I don't see how we can solve this, but I want to just to make this okay.
But I mean, you're saying solve it, but like, you're asking for what? A question of.
Okay, let me get to it. Okay. Just a second. Don't be afraid.
I am going to have to go pretty soon, but we can go a little bit more.
Yeah, I should probably end this soon too. But okay, just one.
We can do another one too if you want to do another part two.
I actually love this. Yeah.
Okay, so we can set up a part two. Sure.
Okay, sure. So one final thing, I just want to illustrate this. I want to put myself in the position of a creator. Don't be offended by this, anybody. So I am this master of everything, this powerful, eternally powerful being, more powerful than anything there is. And I have the ability to create whatever I want. I decide, hey, it would be great if I create these beings, these sensitive beings that can feel, that can reason, that have flaws, that have goodness and all of that. Because I want them to be something good. I want someone else to experience all this beauty. So I create them. And as I create them, and as I create every single individual, as I create this whole mankind, I think to myself, I should create these people or these things, these beings, with the ability to make their own choices, because that way everything will be much better for them. Now I can think of this, and I can think, if I give them the ability to have free will and to make their own choices, then I see they will eventually come to a point where they will make a giant mistake, a giant mess up, and thereafter millions, billions of them will have a corrupt sort of free will, where if they choose evil, they will eventually go to hell. I will eventually punish them with hell for making that wrong choice in the system where I created them. But that's only because they themselves chose evil in this system which I created. And I think to myself, should I create them or not? So there are two options here. I could simply fix that problem, or I could just go ahead and create them, knowing that generations, billions of people will come forth that will all suffer because a glitch happened or a mistake happened in the system which I created. If you were in that position, if I was not in that position, I would not create those people. I would fix the problem and then create those people. And I think that is pretty consistent with how Christianity teaches me to act in the world, in life, for example. If you were in that position, would you go ahead and create those people, or would you fix that problem first?
Yeah, no, I understand the objection. So it's a variation on the problem of evil, theodicy, and you're saying that why wouldn't God have done it a different way in the beginning? And all I can say is that what I said earlier is that we're not told the ultimate reason for why God did permit evil. But God's not under an obligation to tell us why he did X, Y, Z. So this is the whole dilemma of the book of Job, right? Job says, I mean, is it really fair for you to admit all this stuff? And God basically says, you're a finite being. How could I even explain to you all of the different interrelations between all the different created causes? So if you can't even know the created causation within the natural world, how do you expect to know all of this stuff that's operating at like a higher, spiritual realm?
Now, here's the final dilemma. If I look at that argument, and if I think that that this simply doesn't make sense, and that I can, for this reason, not believe in God, because to me, from what I have learned, from what I see, this is evil. This is not good, which is why I cannot believe in this. Even if you think I have no basis to believe in that, even if you think I'm wrong in believing that, because I cannot justify why I call it evil. But if I now really think to myself, I cannot believe in this, this doesn't make sense to me because this doesn't seem good, it seems evil. And I die, and God judges me for that, for making that mistake, for thinking this is evil. I cannot believe in evil. I can only believe in good. And he will judge me, and I will go to hell forever and burn. I simply cannot solve that dilemma. And I know you will say that's not something that we have any right or any position or any power to understand. I get it, but this is a dilemma.
But so first of all, if every position has a dilemma in the sense of finitude limiting our grasp, so what position escapes this kind of a dilemma? And if you're fine with there being no position that escapes this kind of dilemma, then on what basis are we saying that Christianity has to answer a dilemma that pretty much can't be answered by anyone finite?
I don't think Christianity has to answer it. I just think that Christianity cannot answer this specific dilemma, that this dilemma exists. And if I am confronted with the dilemma that I cannot believe in this specific teaching, in this specific doctrine, because it simply doesn't make sense to me and doesn't seem good to me, this is simply a problem. I mean, that's okay. All there is to it.
How do you know that you have the right notion of what makes sense?
I don't. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm completely wrong in my conclusion. Whether I'm right or wrong doesn't even matter. What matters is that I can be right and I can be wrong in this. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe I have completely made the false conclusion, but I have looked for it. I have gone on a journey, and I've really looked for the truth, really looked for goodness. And I came to a conclusion, and maybe that conclusion is wrong. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I did come to that conclusion in the end. And because I'm able to, with no bad intention at all.
Okay, but the ability to come to those conclusions rests on prior things like standards that only make sense in a certain kind of world. And if the world that you're talking about is true, then there aren't any objective standards, as you've said. And so that really there's not a basis to say that it makes sense.
It doesn't. Yeah, that's true. And we can talk about that lengthily, but This would just simply mean that I think Christianity in its truth claim eventually is inconsistent
Okay,
within itself.
but that dilemma is not avoided in any worldview. So it's almost like saying,
Maybe it's not meant to be.
it's almost like, what if I said, I want the perfect infinite algorithm, and unless you give it to me, I will not believe in your argument. So basically, you've weighted the demand with something that can't be given, and then you're saying that, well, since that can't be given, I can't affirm or believe that your argument is sound or your position is sound. But it's almost like it's impossible order. Nobody can do that. So if that's the strictures that we're going to have for why we should or shouldn't believe a paradigm or a worldview, then we shouldn't believe any paradigm or worldview. I mean,
well, the issue is, my conclusion could either be that that God definitely does not exist, or that Christianity is definitely
that's not a valid
true.
conclusion from that question. That's my point.
No,
that question can't tell you that.
I know. That's what I'm saying. I could either go ahead and say God doesn't exist, or Christianity is not true based on this, or I could say I don't really think God exists, or I don't really think Christianity is true because it has this problem, which it doesn't seem to answer. So what I'm making,
I understand the argument, but I'm saying that how do you get to that conclusion from that argument if that argument is almost an impossibly tall order for any position?
Well, we don't need that.
What if I said this? What if I said, you have to show me infinity, or I will not believe in infinity? Like, you could say, well, here's a mathematical number 8 on its side. Oh, that represents infinity. That's not infinity. So I've given you this this challenge that you can't show somebody infinity. You can show like symbols that represent it. And it's a mathematical concept that we kind of all acknowledge, but we don't actually have like a visual, I see infinity, right? So it would almost be like an impossible question. And I don't think that you could say, well, therefore I will not and don't have any reason to believe infinity because you haven't shown it to me.
I don't think that's the same thing. I generally don't understand.
How is it not? I think it's a perfect analogy for this.
I generally don't understand how that is the same thing. I really don't understand how that is the same thing. I'm not saying
so, because you're setting up a question that no worldview could give, and then you're saying because you can't give that, I don't have to believe your position.
No, I don't think that is a standard or a condition that needs to exist in the world. I'm simply saying that Christianity in itself is not consistent in that truth claim. I don't look for that. I don't look for the solution of that problem in the real world. I can, for example, believe that that we exist in a world that is universally unfair.
You seem to admit earlier that God isn't under any obligation to tell us why he permitted something.
Of course,
how is it inconsistent?
It just doesn't make sense. I'm not saying
how. I know you're saying it doesn't. How?
I'm saying it does not make sense that God would create such a system in which good and evil exists when he could have simply gone ahead with something different and then judge me based on my natural inability to make the right judgment, which exists in all of us, which exists in half of humankind, which is bound to exist in all of us. It simply internally doesn't make sense. It's internally inconsistent. If God is good, if God is all-knowing, if God is the best thing in the world, the epitome of goodness, then that should not be a problem to God.
But as I said earlier,
I don't say this is an ultimate argument which completely disqualifies God and religion. I'm simply saying this is a problem which doesn't make it seem like this is the truth.
Okay, but I understand the argument that you're making, and I understand that you see it as an inconsistency. And all I'm saying is that within the Christian paradigm, it's not an inconsistency, because there might be things that we don't get, that we don't grasp.
God doesn't have to do that.
No, he doesn't have to tell us every reason for why he does X, Y, Z.
That's true. God doesn't have to.
And why is that? Well, as I said earlier, because of our finitude and God's infinity, there's always going to be limitations in what we know or describe or understand about God. And so therefore there's always a limit. And that's why I made the analogy to infinity. It's like saying, unless you can resolve exhaustively any area of the unknown, I won't believe the position. And I'm saying that I don't think that's a good argument because
well, that's basically saying
you're asking, why did God do something that he purposed to do from all eternity when he could have done something else?
No.
And I'm saying that we're not told that.
I know. So the only response that we have left is to say, well, we don't know. And God knows what he does.
Well, I also said that the highest speculation that we could give is that the best universe is one in which more of God's attributes are displayed as opposed to a universe where they're not. So if there's a universe where there's no fall, then we don't see God's justice, God's mercy, and God's forgiveness. So these are attributes that display more of his goodness as opposed to a universe where he does not display those.
I would argue that it doesn't. We don't need to exist in a universe where we have to, where the fall can exist, and where we have to be able to make mistakes in order to observe the all qualities or all the goodness of God. We could simply exist
in the Christian paradigm. God is the highest good, and so the more that we know and see of God, the better that universe is. That's what I'm saying.
But we could have known that without being thrown into the fire for that.
Well, not everybody will be thrown into the fire, so to speak. By the way, we have a different conception of the eschaton. It's not a lake of fire in the sense of lava. It means that you experience the eschaton that you've chosen.
Okay, let me say thrown under the bus. Then I was just being metaphorical. So
no, but it's not throwing you under it. It's your decision that you made
unknowingly, because
not unknowingly. I've spent the whole time telling you that we believe that everybody is knowingly making decisions.
Of course, but the thing is, see, you are sitting with me here. We have been for almost 3 hours, 2.5 hours. You have been trying to convince me with arguments. And
well, I made one argument that was pretty strong where I was showing a contradiction, and I think that's a pretty strong argument.
Of course, nothing against your arguments. I think it's pretty good discussing with you. But the issue is that we are sitting here discussing lengthily, and one person may sit here and think, oh, that's a very good argument, I will now believe, while another person may sit here and be like, okay, I'm not convinced.
Okay, but that doesn't have to do with which one.
I know, but simply the fact that we are sitting here, that you are trying to convince me, and that so many people out there will never be convinced by arguments, simply shows that people do not know that you think we know inside, or that we are taught we know deep inside, but that many of us end up not knowing and not believing, genuinely not knowing. I do not accept the premise, the accusation that it is me who chooses not to know. I know for a fact that I'm trying my best to know, but I simply do not know if that is the truth. And if I make a mistake in the end, then I make that mistake because I'm able to make that mistake because I have a flawed mind, which God created.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to have to go because we're hitting
sure.
3 hours. But why don't we set up a part 2 and then we can list some more challenge questions? How's that?
Sure, we can do that.
I mean, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great chat.
Yes, me too. I got a little bit confused when it's at one point, but I think it was a very fruitful conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's it. I think we've spent so much time. I will let Jay go. Maybe I can look into the super chats here and respond to them quickly. But we'll meet again. Jay, is there anything?
Are there? If you do you have specific super chats that were directed at me? I don't want to leave if there were some that wanted to ask me something.
Let me see. Hindu historian, super sticker. Hi, thanks for this interesting discussion. Question: look, and you shall find. Ask, and you shall receive. How is this not the way New Age calls the rule of attraction? Asked by Hugh J. Rection. P said, kindly elucidate on Florovsky's return to the fathers, compared and contrasted with the argument from authority fallacy. Thanks. Likes and subscribers be upon our Grand Mufti AP. Thank you. Anything you want to address in that? Or?
What was the question?
Kindly elucidate on Florovsky's, it wasn't a question, rather, Florovsky's return to the fathers, compared and contrasted with the argument from authority fallacy. Thanks. It was just a recommendation. Maybe we can keep that stuff for next time. Milek83 said, Ridwan kannst du dich bei mir melden in German. Okay, I will get in touch with you. Melik83 sent me an email, theapostateprophet@gmail.com. Rips Exposed made a super chat and said, I feel like this is the conversation you should have had with David Wood, but interesting conversation anyway. Well, I appreciate it. I'll probably have it with him too. Tanner Terry said in a super chat, AP, when you say morality is formed by humans figuring out what works, that is not a complete thought. What does it work for? Yeah, we went into a lengthy discussion on that one. The Lost One said, divine revelation is not consistent. That's my problem with it. Tanner Terry said, AP, you said it is the case that there cannot be an objective basis for morality. This itself is a claim about how morality exists and would be an objective basis for how morality exists in the world. This is self-refuting. We went into a deep thing there. Let me direct something at you if there's something for you. Otherwise, I will let you go. And
Okay.
Wait, how is it possible? The community court knowledge. Momo So Dawa running away from J. Dyer. SC Dawa running away from J. Dyer.
Oh, by the way, I wanted to tell you, back when you were talking with Hijab, I issued a challenge to Muhammad Hijab in that thread. It got 500 likes, 150 retweets, and he completely ignored it. So I don't think Muhammad Hijab wants to have a debate with me either. But I will lay this out there. If he watches this and he does want to have a debate, we can.
Yeah, Muhammad Hijab, if you want to accept the debate, accept it. What did you want to debate with him? What's the topic?
Well, I'm sure we would debate the Quran and Jesus and his deity and this kind of stuff.
I think Muhammad Hijab has this thing. He will agree to debates if he can attack an opposing belief or worldview. If he can, for example, criticize Christianity or criticize atheism, he will agree to that debate if you push him. But he will not agree to a debate in which he has to actually defend Islam.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah. He runs from that like crazy. You should challenge him on Islam too after you're done with your Quran study. Jay made Shabir cry. Imagine what he'd do to Muhammad Hijab. By the way, we should talk about your debate with Shabir Ali sometime. I haven't had the opportunity to completely watch it through, but we could definitely talk about that here. Great guest and stream, AP. Next time you have Jay on, could the two of you review Jay's debate with Shabir Ali? And the transcendental argument that was applied. Thanks, the judgment. This is Nataverse. Thank you, Nataverse, by the way, for arranging this. And here is one for you, actually. Jay, Yahweh's Eiler? Jay, do you as an Orthodox believe only the Orthodox will be saved and not other Christians? If yes, why? P.S. Your logic is brilliant.
Well, so ultimately, yes, a person has to be joined to Christ and to the Orthodox Church by whatever means. So if God chooses to or makes a means to do that, as we were talking about earlier, with those who somehow died and had not heard this, if there's an extraordinary way by which he preaches the gospel to them, we would say that's a possibility. If he's operated on that principle in the past, it's conceivable that he would do that in the future. But however he does that, it really can't occur without a person being in some way joined to the Orthodox Church, yes.
Okay. I was curious about that too. Tanner Terry said, Jay, if the afterlife is a choice between multiple goods like Adam and Eve pre-fall, then could there be another fall? If not, why not?
No, because the purpose of Christ's resurrection, St. Maximus argues, is to remove that possibility and that dianoia. So we don't have like the same type of discursive reasoning that would lead us to make mistakes or fall into sin in the eschaton, because that's been healed and restored. That's one of the purposes of the resurrection.
See, there I would again say, couldn't that have been the case beforehand? But then we would get into this endless cycle again. But I will let you go if you need to go. And
well, let's do that again in the future.
Okay, we can do that.
All right, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. It was a great chat.
Thank you so much for joining me, Jay. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
All right, have a good night.
You too. All right, everybody. That was interesting. This was, it was fruitful. I liked it. I would actually like to have this conversation again with Jay, also in the future with others, with other Christians, Christian apologists. I would love to have it with Muslims, but see, Muslims just don't like me for some reason. I have no idea why. But yeah, I really appreciated this. I didn't want to have a debate deliberately because I would maybe have a debate with somebody else. I recently spoke with Inspiring Philosophy, and we agreed that we could sit down and have a debate, an actual debate about the whole God question. And in that debate, we would it would be moderated by Cameron Bertuzzi, Capturing Christianity. We would have opening statements, timed statements, and all that. I don't know if that will happen, but I really actually like these free conversations that we have. I really enjoy that. It takes away the whole edge of of hey, I am right. I will prove you wrong. I will destroy you. I am the right one. The whole arrogance and the whole edge of that, it takes it away. It really leaves the confrontation to a proper, peaceful exchange of ideas, inquiry of truth, where we actually listen to each other and respond when we think it is time to respond. So yeah, I like this. I will have this again. And thanks so much, Nadaverse, for arranging this. I will quickly read through all those super chats that I have missed. And then I will hopefully leave because it's way too late for me here. Hindu Story made a super chat and said, hi. Hindu Story made a super sticker too, which I cannot see because I have it on my smaller screen here. Let me drag this out. I just did out like a Canadian. How is it going? Okay, I see it now. Ribs Exposed. Tanner Terry said, AP, when you say morality is formed by humans figuring out what works, that is not a complete thought. What does it work for? Pragmatism is said. Man, I should make a whole monologue about that. But we can just I would love to debate that with David Wood, actually, because we were supposed to have a morality debate. The Lost One said, divine revelation is not consistent. That's my problem with it. That's a whole topic that I didn't actually want to bring up. It would be too complicated, I would say. But yeah, worth a discussion too. Tanner Terry said, to both, what is the nature of man? Given this view of man, how is it possible that humans can acquire knowledge? You want to discuss evolution against creation? I'm currently studying psychology. I will tell you more in the future. Sophia Films made a super chat and said, at least this isn't a shout fest. Thanks for decency. Thank you. I really appreciate that too. This is all it should be, really. Sophia Films said, Momo and SC Dawa are running away from Jay Dyer. If Momo and Shabir the best Islam has, then Islam is done. I'm preparing at the end of Muhammad Hijab, by the way. It will hopefully be done within the next few. I won't give it away. I keep getting sick of it and sitting down and thinking, why am I dealing with this nonsense? But yeah, it will be there soon. Sophia Films also said, join and fight the Antichrist with us in all its forms. Maybe we can agree that Islam is the Antichrist. How about that? 12 BKL My Shoe said, the question which monotheistic God is a true God is the main conflict of the world's largest religions. How is this different than polytheists? You see, if we came to the conclusion that that the monotheist God actually exists, that there is actually indeed a monotheistic God, I hate the word actually, and I have said it so many times, that there is indeed a monotheistic God, then I would really go into finding out which religion tells us the truth about this monotheistic God. And we don't really have many options there. We have Judaism, we have Christianity, and we have Islam. It looks like logically I would completely dismiss Islam. I believe 200% that it is absolutely false in its truth claim. It would leave me with Christianity. But Christianity is also theologically, I think it is flawed, inconsistent, and maybe we can discuss that next time. But again, the problem is the question of the monotheistic God, or God in and of itself, not whether which one gives us the right answer on this specific God. Sophia Films said, my brain feels like soup right now, so sorry for making for speaking incomplete or incoherent sentences. Sophia Films said, come to Christ, ex-Muslims. He is the truth and the way. Sophia Films also said, you made so many super chats. I appreciate that, Sophia Films. Turkey was Christian Anatolia. Revert to Christ, AP. And Sophia Films also said, well, I am probably a descendant of barbaric, savage tribes from East Asia that wanted to invade the world. So I cannot take credit for the whole Christian part, but I get your point. Sophia Film says Jay Dyer makes Tucker Carlson's about to slave faces. Yahweh's Eiler, I read that question to Jay. Spotlight official said, remove religion from the conversation, then ask, does God exist? Also, one thing that I wanted to go into, maybe we can talk about that next time. But I think Jay basically was arguing that he has reason to believe that God exists, and he has solid reason to believe that it is only the Christian narrative that is telling us the truth, and we have only begun to dig into that. Josh Arno said, I don't always make super chats, but when I do, I prefer you two guys debating. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And Solitary Amy said, AP, do you like what being a Christian is about? What if you start with faith and then search more after you take the first step, grow in faith? Or doing that would make me, would create a bias in me, which would then push me toward believing in something without knowing whether I'm actually believing in the right thing or not. Which is why, to me, the only reasonable and honest way, internally honest way to believe in something is to first make sure that you believe in it, first conclude that it actually makes sense, that it is logical, that it is that it's true, and then to start following it. If I just followed something because I think it is nice or it is good, then I would be fooling myself. I would kind of be a hypocrite, right? Yeah. I also don't agree completely with the Christian sense of morality. I'm really happy thinking freely and having no limits to what I can and cannot think about and conclude. But thank you. And Joshua Schmidt made a super chat finally and said, living a Christian life is a better witness than arguments. Jay is a good example of this, as even though he made many arguments, he was polite and decent, opening the door for more converts. That, I would say, is not a good argument, because you could argue that there are many terrible Christians, there are many good Muslims, many terrible Muslims, many good Christians, many terrible atheists, many good atheists. Most of the atheists that I've encountered throughout my life were very good people that I could trust. So you cannot really judge something based on that, based on the experiences of people that you see. But yeah, that's my 2 cents to that. Anyway, I will be leaving. And that is all that I want to say for tonight. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm not an agnostic. I'm an agnostic atheist. I can maybe explain that some other time. Yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. Have a fantastic day, and as always, see you next time, and stay away from Islam.